Hey everybody, it's Dale Jr. back again for another episode of the Dale Jr. Download, and this is the Ally Guest segment, and today we have Gary Nelson. He's a crew chief, a winning crew chief in NASCAR. He also was the technical director in NASCAR for almost a decade, and now winning races in the IMSA series for many, many years. What a life this guy's had. Been wanting to get him here for a long time. Let's get it started. The following is a production of Dirty Mo Media. All right, everybody. Another episode of the Dale Jr. Download, and this is our guest segment presented by Ally. Thank you, Ally, for everything you do here for the Dale Jr. Download. Thank you for bringing us these amazing guest segments every single week. Ally, congratulations on your win at Chicago with Alex Bowman. They do so many great things in this sport, including supporting us here at Dirty Mo Media, and we're thankful for that. And they bring us a great ally today, Gary Nelson. He has been very hard to talk into coming onto the show. I'll ask him about that when he sits down, but he comes across to me as somebody who's not really that excited about telling the stories of the past or talking about himself. He just doesn't need to do it. I follow him on social media. He's out riding on his bike all the time, on his Harley, just kind of living life, still going to the races every now and then with the IMSA series and having great success there over the years. You know, as badly as we want to talk to him about his career as a crew chief in NASCAR and as the head technical director or head NASCAR official for years, it's just not been something he's excited to do. But I finally ran into him and got him face-to-face and said, hey, I promise I'll take care of you, man. I'm not going to put you in a bad spot. And he couldn't say no. So he's here. And I want to get him in the room, get this started, so let's go. Have a seat right here.
Yes,
It's
sir.
your chair. You son of a gun.
It's been a while, huh?
I know it. So, pop them headphones on if you don't mind. Dude, so Gary Nelson, thank you for being here.
Yes, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I have wanted you to come on this show for so long, and I was nervous. You know, you're a hard guy to get a hold of. You're spending a lot of your life these days traveling. Mm-hmm. You get on your bike and you'll just go ride.
Yes, sir.
You'll post a little bit on social media, so I kind of know where you're at and what you're up to. And I know that you're doing things these days on your terms.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, and I was worried. You know, you're hard to track down, hard to get a commitment out of to come onto the show, and you seemed a bit not that I guess not that excied.
Apprehensive.
Yes. Apprehensive, right?
Yes.
Why?
So most of my career, has been followed publicly throughout, from the early days in NASCAR, and the stories seem to grow and change over time.
Right.
And I was at the beginning of so many of them, and if I come on and start correcting what other people have said that I've done, and get the story straight, it kind of puts that other person in a
bad spot.
Yeah, his memory and mine may be different, but I was the guy that did it, so I think I remember it pretty well.
Yeah.
So,
well, look, I can appreciate that. I'm glad that I finally was able to get in front of you and say, hey, I promise you, we'll take care of you.
Yeah, you tricked me,
Yes, I did?
No.
Well,
I was talking to a very important person at General Motors and Jeff Gordon at a social event in Amelia Island, and I couldn't say no to you in front of them. So.
Yeah, no, I got you in a good spot.
Yeah.
And so I'm worried, like, man, I wonder what he will be willing to share with us, because I knew you were apprehensive. You come walking in with this radio.
Yeah.
And you set the tone right from the start. So this radio, this looks exactly like a radio.
From the 70s.
From the 70s, right?
Yeah.
And so it is 25 pounds. It
25
feels like
pounds.
It's more than that,
Yeah.
but I might just be weak. But it's got the knobs on the top and everything. And so you would, obviously have this in the car to go with the scales and everything.
Allegedly.
Where did this come from?
Obviously made in the shop. So the days in the 70s, they did not weigh the cars after the race. All you had to do was get over the scale before the race. And same with ride height, same with about everything. Once you took the checkered flag, you drove your truck on the hauler, and occasionally, late in the 70s, they started tearing down an engine, but that was all they would do.
Yeah. And so do you know what car this came, what shop this was in, what car this might have been in?
Yeah, I know pretty well.
Do you want to let me know? Was it where you worked?
Allegedly, it came out of a shop where I worked. Yes, sir.
From the 70s.
I've been moving it around since the 70s.
And you hung on to this.
Yeah, I was kind of proud of it. Yeah.
Did you make this?
Let's say some people I know and I came together, and that was the result.
Man. All right. So let's dive into it, man. The and I want to say, like, Darrell, has a lot of people have come on our show, and we talk about innovation. I call it innovation.
Yeah.
And I've drove some cars with some innovation. And we've told a lot of great stories on this show. One of my favorites was Darrell Waltrip, Dick Beatty walking Darrell Waltrip. It might have been before Dick Beatty, but one of the head technical directors walking Darrell out onto the track and saying, "Darrell, look at all this lead shot. Wonder where this is coming from." And they had something that would plug the jack stop on his car. I think it was Junior Johnson's Mountain Dew car in '81. They plugged the jack stop, filled the whole frame rail with shot, and then plugged the jack stop up with something that would eventually melt out of the car in the heat of the race, and it would just empty the shot onto the track. And so, I had heard that story in whispers for so many years as a young kid, right? And then a teenager thinking, no way they did that. That's just a rumor. That's just a wise tale. And Darrell came on and was at his age and his years. He's like, oh yeah, we did that. And then they had the car on the jack stands going through technical inspection, trying to find what it is that makes Darrell's car so good that year. And the jack is under the jack stop, hiding the hole. And so they could never find it because they couldn't see it. So smart.
So you've brought it all the way around to why I've been reluctant to come here.
Yeah.
So if I tell you this story from a guy who was there, and the folklore story is different, the viewers will have, or the listeners will have to decide which one is correct.
Yeah.
So memories change over time.
Sure.
But I don't want to cause any
hard feelings.
Yeah, with different stories of this, different versions of the same story.
Sure. Well, I think people. Go ahead.
Well, I'll go ahead and tell you. In those days, in the 70s, in NASCAR racing, officiating was not much.
Yeah.
And if you raced in the 70s with a 100% rule book legal race car, you didn't race for long because you would be out of business.
Yeah.
So I came NASCAR racing in '76. Darrell Waltrip was a driver, Dyguard Racing, and Darrell was a hell of a driver. I mean, great guy.
Yeah.
But when we ran full weight, full height, full everything, we didn't run very well. Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look around and see one guy's front of his car scraping on the ground, and ours is up to the 4-inch rule.
Yeah.
So to me, my efforts were, number one, we got to stay in business. We had a sponsor and owners, and we had to win. The pressure's always on in this business to perform. So we had to come up with ways to be competitive against other cars. And so some of my reluctance is people's heroes now. I'm kind of discussing their methods at the same time. And I don't think that's a good position for me to be in. But I'm really pushing that the officials were not very good.
Yeah.
In those days, and so we ended up with finding ways to get over the scales, because once you got over the scale, it was whatever you could do, right?
Yeah.
And so buckshot came. It was my idea. I found a way. There was one race car we had. We called it Bertha. Robert G., your grandfather, did all the body work on it, and that was one of the most successful cars to race in those days.
Yes.
So Darrell, he was the driver. Buddy Parrott was the crew chief, and I was the chief mechanic, or car. I think they call it car chief now.
Yeah.
Came in one night, didn't tell anybody. Found a way to. First went to the gun shop and bought a bunch of bags of buckshot. Found a way to take the battery sat on top of the frame rail. You could take the battery out, drill a hole in the frame, pour 50 pounds of buckshot in, and then the jack, where the jack post was, it was just a little short piece of tubing that during pit stops you would jack the car up under. Cut that out inside that tubing, so now there's a hole up into the frame. Put a little plug there, ran a bolt up, and it kept it tight for all the practice, and just for the race, loosened it, and had counted the threads of the bolt, and you turn it 3 turns and the plug will fall out. But I really believe we were just keeping even with people doing other things. Maybe they were doing buckshot as well. I don't know. But
how would the bolt eventually come out?
The bolt was about I think the frame rail was maybe 4 inches. The bolt was about 3.5 inches, and the plug was up maybe a 1/2 inch. So it's a 1/2 inch bolt, and you tighten it, and it would just so that it was inside the tube for the jack post, and it would bottom out against the end of the threads, and it would be tight. But you could loosen it just before the race, and the driver would just reach to his left side, put his fingers on the bolt.
He could turn it
3 turns.
Yes.
And
so the driver controlled it.
Yes, sir.
And then that would drop open up the plug.
The plug would fall out on the pace lap. And the buckshot, the buckshot didn't melt. It just rolled.
I thought there was something. The plug would melt. I thought there was something in the jack post that would just melt away and allow the buckshot to leave.
That's how all the stories change over time.
Right. Well, I made that up in my head probably.
So we were at Bristol after doing it. Maybe I don't know if it was. I think it was the night. Yeah, it was the night race at Bristol. So it was August. We had only started doing that on the short tracks when we ran Bertha. And that car, apparently Darrell turned it, a half a turn less than he should have. So the buckshot didn't come out until our first pit stop. On pit road, when they let the jack down during the first pit stop, then the plug came out and the buckshot started pouring out
there on pit road.
On pit road. And our guys were just panicking. But you can't see it because it's the color of the asphalt, and so our guys were panicking to sweep it up, and I said, "Stop, guys! You're sweeping up a dry pit road. Just one guy go with a broom." But unfortunately, the trail went through Junior Johnson's pit, who was the next pit. And so somebody on that team turned us in. They said it was.
So it was. You eventually got discovered.
Well, they didn't. All they said was we saw buckshot coming out of the car when it went through the pits, and so somehow Dave Marcus got his story somehow he got put into the story. But he had nothing to do with it, and so we have scanners, listening to the officials, and the official says, hey, we got a report that 88 car is dropping buckshot, which we finally found the guy doing it. When this race is over, get officials all the way around the car, circle him, don't let anybody touch the car. We're going to find out if he's the one doing it, because there was stories about finding buckshot around the different tracks. And we knew our days were numbered on it anyway.
Yeah.
And so I was the car chief at the time, and the official's name was Chip Warren. He walked up to me and he said, all the people were back, got Darrell out of the car, got him away from it. And the officials said, all right, Gary, jack up this car because I want to get under there and I'm going to find out where this buckshot's coming from. And I thought for sure we were caught. We were going to be in a lot of trouble. And when he said jack it up, I put the jack right under the place where the buckshot was coming from, jacked it up, and slipped some jack stands under there, but left the jack there. And he crawled all around under the car, couldn't find it. And he came away from it and said, it must not be them.
Wow.
And that's the actual
Stop
story.
doing it.
Yeah. That was the last time we ever did it. And that is the story, 100%.
And the official's name was
Chip Warren.
Chip Warren, did he not own a little bait and tackle shop on Brawley School Road called Country Corner or something like that?
Sounds familiar.
A long time ago.
Sounds very familiar. I believe you're right, yeah.
Do you this is a very, very fuzzy memory of mine, and we'll cut this out of the show if it's not true, but did you ride with Dad and me when I was a very little boy during a snowstorm? It snowed a lot one night.
I believe so.
And we went riding in Dad's truck in the middle of the night.
Yeah,
and we ran into Darrell Cruz and his band of loggers and rode. There were like 15 four-wheel drive trucks going all down through Brawley School in Lake Norman, way
just
back before it was developed. Tearing up everything.
Yeah, that was
you were
fun
in that truck
with your dad. Yeah, that was always fun. I don't have a big memory of it.
I don't either.
I just remember a couple rides with your dad over time. But
so this was, I'll try to do the best I can on, my memory is also very fuzzy about it, but I never got asked to do anything. I felt like I never got asked to go anywhere with Dad, right? I begged him to take me everywhere he went, right? And he was always going to Mamaw's to work on his bush cars at his little 2-car garage next to Mamaw's house every day of the week. And I'm like, Dad, please take me, especially in the summer. Well, I don't know what it was, but it snowed, which was not too rare back in the day. We had a pretty good snow. Let's say it was 6 inches. This is 1982 maybe. And Lake Norman and Brawley School and all that was barely developed. There was all the original, homes.
Oh, yeah.
There was nothing out there.
Yeah, it was just trees.
Yes. Yeah. And so it felt like it was midnight. And Dad had his 4-wheel drive square-bodied Chevrolet truck.
Yeah,
single
I rode
cab,
in that many times.
Single cab. He's like, come on. I'm like, ooh, I get to go. I must be 8 years old, maybe.
Yeah, I remember you being
barely could see over the dash.
Yeah.
I get in that truck, and all of my life, felt like you were in there. And you were.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
And and I think at one point someone else even got in the truck.
I don't remember you specifically on that ride. So it's fuzzy.
I was there, and we go. I'm like, I didn't know you and Dad were friendly, right? Yeah. I mean, I knew.
Oh, yeah.
I was barely old enough to even know what was going on at the racetrack and everything. But so you're there, and I'm like, for most of my life, I've thought, man, was he there, or was I thinking? Was I
dreaming it, or what? Yeah.
But so it was you, Dad, and eventually it's one point in the trip. So we ride down the road, and as soon as we get out of the driveway, Dad's just weaving all over the road, off in the ditch and into fields, and just being
spinning
crazy,
around,
having fun, spinning around.
Yeah.
And all the way down our road, and then we're heading out toward Brawley School. To ride through there, I guess, and just kind of cruise around. We met Darrell Cruz. Darrell Cruz, and I'm saying this for the listeners. I know you're maybe aware of Darrell.
Oh, yeah.
He worked on race cars, owned dirt cars, also was a logger. And he owned a logging business, and he had about, several employees. They all drove big, giant, square-bodied trucks. Everybody did. And so we meet them, and we pull up, and Dad pulls up. Darrell's facing the opposite direction, and they had a conversation. And Darrell's like, what y'all doing? Dad's like, we're out messing around. He's like, all right, well, let's all go mess around together. And so for the rest of the night, it was like 15 trucks in a line, just going crazy.
Going through parking lots.
Running over mailboxes.
Yeah.
Somebody broke a wheel off at one point. I remember Dad shining his headlights on this one square-bodied, it was a truck that had a white camper top on it, and he had white wheels, and the left rear tire was broken off, like it broke the axle.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
I do.
I
remember.
I may have said, this is too crazy. I'm going to go with
you might have.
Yeah.
I remember Rick Bost, who was Dad's first employee, was in a truck with somebody, and they spun and doored a telephone pole. Just big dent in the door, no big deal. But Rick said, I'm getting the hell out of this truck, and got in our truck. And so for the last couple hours, it might have been 4 of us in that front seat together. And maybe you ended up getting in another truck at one point. But
yeah, that had to be, 76?
No. This is like 81, 82.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I may.
You were there.
Okay.
I promise you, I'm putting you there.
Yeah. Maybe we had a few Bud Lights on that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. But I just, dude, Daddy and all them guys must have run around for hours till 2, 3 in the morning.
I went on a few of those rides with
really?
your dad. Yeah.
That was something.
We did, got rained out at Wilkesboro one time, piled in a van, and just went to his lake house. And it was quite a trip that day.
Yeah.
We traffic was not a problem. Riding with your dad was always a treat.
Yeah.
I can tell you one other story about your dad.
Yeah.
We were at Rockingham for a test. There was a lot of teams testing. And in those days, Alan Kowicki was sponsored by Quincy Steakhouse. Mm-hmm. So your dad comes driving. I'm working with a different team, but I'm walking across the driveway from the garage to the haulers, and your dad drives up in a van. He's, hey, it's lunchtime. Let's go get some lunch. I said, sure. And so I jumped in, and we drive a little further, and there's Alan Kowicki standing in between his car and the hauler. And he's wearing Quincy's Steakhouse driver's suit.
Yeah.
Right? Your dad says to Alan, he says, hey, Alan, jump in. We got to talk to you. Alan jumps in, closes the door, off he goes. Just doesn't give him a chance to get out.
Yeah.
Drives out the tunnel, down the road. Alan's sitting there with his Quincy's driver's suit on. Takes us to Quincy's Steakhouse for lunch down in Rockingham. Yeah. And Alan had to sit there through the lunch wearing his driver's suit with all of the customers
thinking,
like you watch on a television commercial, the race driver is always wearing the driver's suit out in
the
public.
commercial.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, let's dive into your career. How did you get introduced to motorsports?
My first introduction was probably in my 8 years old at my family's house on Sunday afternoon. There was races. I grew up in Southern California. On Sunday afternoon, Channel 5, KTLA, I believe, in Southern California, had local dirt track races. It was, I think, Ascot and Gardena Speedway. And so we would watch them as a family, in front of the TV. One day, my dad said, hey, me and my 2 brothers, let's go to the races today. So we drove down there, went to, I believe it was Ascot, and watched it was kind of modifieds in those days, and I thought that was just the greatest thing. But after that, no more racing, just watching on TV. And there would be something on Wide World Sports every once in a while or on the news of, something happening. But not really a lot of coverage in California of the Southern stock car racing. But I was a big fan of it. Got up to about, 14 years old, got a dirt bike, and there was some canyons between where I lived in Redlands, California, and Riverside, California. So we'd ride dirt bikes. We found ways through the hills and the canyons and end up at Riverside Raceway. And there was a spot over by turn 8 where you could lift up the fence and crawl under it and walk down to turn 6 and have a great view of the races. So that was something we would do. And I got more and more interested in it. At the house, I would help my dad, always working on things. He's always building engines or working on family cars or relatives' cars. And I was always in the garage with him. And my little thing was, as a young guy, I wanted to have the next wrench ready for him. Yes. So when he turned around, it was in his hand. Yep. And he taught me to fix things, not take off a bad part and put on a part. He said, that's just a parts changer. He said, you need to understand why you're taking that part off and why it's not working, and try to fix it yourself. So we would, instead of changing a water pump, we would press out the bearings and the seals and fix the water pump, not just go buy another one and throw that one away. And we did that with everything. And he taught me how to do those things. So fast forward, I'm maybe 15, 16 years old, and I'm at a friend's house, and I hear an engine running, a stock car engine, a 57 Chevy, out behind this friend's house. There was a barn, like on the next property, and this guy, Ivan Baldwin, was running an engine out there. And I walked up, and me and my friends, we didn't look too automotive in those days. Ivan had, in those days, you grease your hair like Fonzie. Yeah. And our hair was not that way. My hair was maybe fairly long. And so we were didn't fit well. But I asked enough questions, I think, where he realized that I may have a little mechanical aptitude. So he asked me, he said, hey, I'm going to the races this weekend. I've got this 57 Chevy that I just bought. It was a street car without an engine in it. And he said, I need the body off of that chassis. If you guys want to do it, you can make some money. Man, I was all about that. Yeah. He left me the key to his shop. Me and a buddy of mine, we got in there and took the body off over the weekend. And he came back, he was very impressed that some 15, 16-year-old kids could do that, and gave me a job right then. Damn. So then I was in, I just got somewhere in there, I got my driver's license, went to high school for the first day of 10th grade when the school, the fall came, and I left and worked on the race car some more. He was in there working. I went over there. After a couple of weeks, I said, I really need to get back to school. So I went back to the high school. They, I didn't remember my locker, what my locker was, what the combination was, or what classes I was supposed to be in. So my second day of high school, I graduated. Oh, crap. Went back to work on race cars.
So you didn't finish high school?
It didn't barely started. Yeah. 2 days.
Damn.
And went back working on race cars, and that was $50 a week. And I had my driver's license. I could travel. I could work out some, live with some friends, and eventually got my own place. And I was all racing. Yeah. We'd work hours and hours. Probably the first real week. Went to a track called Orange Show Speedway in Southern California, and hit the pit gate at the end of the pit gate, and the frame just diamond or Z the frame. We had to race the next week, so Monday night all night, Tuesday night all night, Wednesday night all night. We're building this car back, and finally I told Ivan, I said, man, I just need to get back to school. I'm not cut out for this stuff. And he told me right then, he said, just stick with me through this one and we'll have it made after this. And I tell people that story still today when we're working late or all night. Yeah. You never get through it. But you have to just keep pushing and keep pushing. And so Ivan became a champion. We won a lot of races on the West Coast. I mean, racing 3 nights a week, 3 days. We'd race Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon. Friday night was Irwindale Speedway. Saturday night was Orange Show Speedway. And Sunday afternoon was we would pick wherever we could go to get the most money. So it might be Las Vegas, or it might be El Cajon down near San Diego, or it might be Saugus, or it might be Bakersfield. We would just run somewhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the promoter would pay us to come beat their local guy that's been winning all the time. Mm-hmm. And so we made a lot of money, or we made enough money to do all of that, support ourselves, and keep racing. So every track champion got an invitation to go to Daytona. And so that got me started going to Daytona to run the sportsman race.
Yep.
And
the 300.
The 300 on Saturday.
What was the first year, do you remember, going to Daytona?
70 or 71.
Damn.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
That must have been insane. Had you ever been to the East Coast to see a NASCAR event?
No.
So that's
I'd never been on an airplane. I'd never been out of the state. Maybe just to Nevada to race. Sometimes we might have gone to Phoenix a few times.
So you take your car, the car y'all are racing, out there to...
Well, this is so we raced a 60... Let me make sure I got the years right. A 68 Chevelle. We bought a 68 Chevelle, but you had to have in those years you had to have a car within 2 years of being new in NASCAR in the Cup Series, and after that it could be in the Sportsman Series. Mm-hmm. So the tail lights were different between a 68 and a 69. And not much else. So we built up a Chevelle like that, and we could go back and forth from a 68 to 69. So we would run it. We ran it that year in Riverside in the Cup race. Oh. We entered the Cup race with the 69 Chevelle.
Yeah.
And we took that same car, put it on a trailer, and went to Daytona in February. The Riverside races were in January. Went to Daytona in February with the tail lights now down on the below the, just about between the bumper and the quarter panel on the 68, and we raced it as a sportsman car then. And the officials came around. Somebody didn't like that.
Yeah.
And so they brought Bobby Allison over and said, "Bobby, you know a lot about Chevelles," because Chevelles weren't the popular car in those days. And they looked underneath inside the trunk and said, "Is that really a 68 or is that a 69?" And Bobby said, "Some came that way and some came the other way." And so we ended up racing both divisions within a month of each other.
Damn.
And got some recognition for that. But they would the NASCAR weekly tracks were a big deal in those days. I mean, I was a NASCAR member, and the first year when I worked with Ivan, I think it was $4 for a pit pass. But if you didn't have a NASCAR license, it was $5. And if you didn't have white pants on, it was $6.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So I remember the first time going to the racetrack, everybody was supposed to wear white pants. And I never knew why or how, but we all had to wear white pants. And Ivan didn't buy me any white pants for first few races or a NASCAR membership. But then it wasn't long. I became a NASCAR member and got some white pants. And we went to all those
There are
races.
Videos back in the 60s and where everybody in the pits is wearing white pants.
Oh, I was there. I was one of them. Yeah.
And you're like, why is that a thing? I guess it was just, I always thought it was, that was just the style back then.
No, it was a $1 fine.
Golly.
It was cheaper to pay $5 for a new pair of pants than to go to 5 races,
Yeah. So you ended up working through 76 with Baldwin.
Through 76, yes, sir.
And so, you're going to Daytona. You're racing. You're at the Riverside races. So you're starting to mingle and be around the NASCAR Cup, Eastern NASCAR Cup circus.
Yes.
What was your? I mean, how do you end up deciding to make this move?
Well, after the year where we did the Cup car in Riverside, then we just started doing strictly the 300 or the Saturday race at Riverside and at Daytona as well. But it was just me and Ivan and maybe a couple friends, so we had to do pit stops. So the Dygaard crew was near us, so I met David Ift somehow. I don't remember how.
Right.
And I said, David, if you guys could pit crew our car on Saturday, we'll pay you. And yeah. So he brings the pit crew over, and I get to know him a little more each race there. I think we raced January there, June there, and then I think we raced Ontario in the fall, in November. Mm-hmm. all companion races with the Cup and the Sportsman, or what you would call Xfinity. And so we got closer and closer each event, and finally David said, it looks like you're really, you're a good guy. Why don't you move to Daytona and come to work with us, the Gatorade
Because that's
team.
where the Dygaard shop was.
Dygaard was on Fentress Boulevard, right across almost from the Speedway.
Yeah.
So I told Ivan, I said, yeah, it's been great, but I got to take this opportunity.
Yep.
And I went, and that was a big move for me.
It's huge.
Yeah, sold what I didn't have a lot, but sold everything, and showed up there. I don't know, maybe I had a couple $1,000s in my pocket. Got off the airplane. David picked me up at the airport, took me to the race shop, and we started wet sanding a car that day.
Damn.
That day, yeah. And I said, well, I need to go find a place to live, and I need to get a car.
What'd you do?
So David let me stay at his apartment with his family for a couple nights, and found an apartment, got the car wet sanded and done, and then stopped at a car dealer, bought a used car, $600 or something. And so I was running low on money, but I had a house. I still see the house in Daytona
You do?
that we rented. Yeah, it was me and 3 other guys rented it. And
did they also work in the shop?
yeah, they were all guys in the shop.
Yep.
Your grandfather was there a lot. He stayed in a motel called the Scottish Inn down the street. Yep. And that's where I first met him. And
Robert G.
What a character, Robert.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what a character. So anyway, the 4 of us lived in this. It was kind of an apartment house thing with 3 bedrooms, so somebody always had the couch. But we kept score in Florida. I didn't ever see anything like this, but in Florida, there's bugs, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the guys' name was Frog Fagan, and he lived there. He had come. They'd hired him from Banjos. They'd hired me from California. They hired a couple other guys that, we all just kind of started. David's trying to build this team. And Frog started a scoreboard on the wall in the kitchen with a Sharpie to who killed the most cockroaches. You'd hear
palmetto bugs, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah,
you'd hear a shoe hit the wall, and somebody got one, and they'd put a check mark. So that wasn't those days were not the greatest. You look back and it says good old days. I'm not so sure those were the good old days,
No.
but I have a lot of memories from it.
All right, so you're working at Dygaard on Darrell Waltrip's car. I guess Darrell's driving it that early. I wouldn't know.
Darrell was the driver.
He was, because Donnie had drove the car for a while. Darrell was driving for Bud Moore, but eventually would get the opportunity to drive for Dygaard.
Right. My days with that started. Darrell was already there, and Donnie was gone.
Having talked to Darrell, having read and studied and researched a ton, the Dygaard team, when Donnie drove the car, it was a very young team. They were in Daytona, which,
right.
These days sounds really unusual because everything's here in Charlotte. But Daytona was the headquarters for NASCAR, and so maybe it wasn't so unusual back then to be that far out of the the NASCAR bubble where
right.
parts and pieces and chassis builders and all that were still up here in Concord, even back then.
Yeah.
Did it feel like you guys were outside of the bubble, even being right across the street from Daytona?
Definitely. One of the people that got hired that winter was Robert Yates.
Yes.
And so Robert came to Florida. Robert G came, and they're North Carolina guys, and all the good help was really transplanted,
moving
and
there.
and temporary, and you can't really build a solid program around that. So Robert's, one of his first things was we got to move to North Carolina.
So how long did it take by the time you got there before you moved the team? We
moved in March, so
right away.
I got there right at the first of the year, I believe, or just at the end of. So I end up just a few months, and now I'm driving to North Carolina, and that's we worked out of Robert G's shop over on Hudspeth Road,
right behind Robert's shop, Robert's house,
right behind his house. Yes,
no
while we were getting a shop organized.
That's like a damn 1.5, 2 bay shop.
Yeah,
it's not very big.
Yeah, we didn't have much.
No
we
kidding.
Had a couple cars and kept one in a hauler. We didn't even have a hauler. We had a truck with a trailer behind it.
You always had to have a car there just to keep it out of the weather.
Yeah, and that was pretty temporary. We were there maybe 4 or 5 weeks while we got a shop organized over near the Charlotte airport, and we ended up moving into that shop, and that was right near Holman and Moody in those days, and that was a pretty neat time. I thought Robert Yates was such a great guy to work with, but his vision, I'd never really worked with somebody who looked past the next race, and Robert was always looking, and he taught me this, always be planning for something to be better, because if you've got a direction and you start going in that direction, you don't have to. You only need to adjust a little bit. You don't have to turn around and go back the other way.
Do you remember Buddy Parrott?
Yes, sir.
Coming in, there was I think in 1980, Buddy Parrott was fired twice.
David got fired. He was the crew chief, and I was still just barely above floor sweeper. I was slowly working my way up. I was not a top mechanic, and I could weld better, and I could do a lot of things better, but I just stayed quiet and let evolution take care of itself. And so, unfortunately, I had a great time working with David, but he got run off. A guy named Darrell Derringer was hired to kind of manage things.
Yep.
He was a great guy. I really enjoyed him, but one of the first things he did was bring in Buddy Parrott. And Buddy was a really, really good guy. I really enjoyed working with Buddy over there at Dygaard. And we just kept building, and we got winning more and more. Darrell was an amazing driver. I mean, just it was kind of difficult to work with. But Darrell and I never had any issues. Now, other people around would struggle with Darrell.
Yeah.
But I think Darrell trusted me, and he knew that when I put the car together, it was going to be okay. And so I only remember Buddy getting run off once.
Yeah, maybe it was just once.
Yeah.
I thought he kind of came and went a couple times, I thought. But I've never really spent a ton of time with Buddy. I know his sons very well. And I think that Buddy seems like a very easygoing kind of guy.
Fun guy.
Yeah.
His kids were, I guess, but Todd and Brad are probably your age, weren't they? Yeah. Yeah, so they were. I remember them the same way.
A little bit older than me, but they. I know that family well. I don't want to pretend to know Buddy better than I do, but I often wondered. So as we would learn, Darrell gets in the dispute with Bill. I think it's Bill Gardner.
Yes.
Right, and then there's this at the 600, I believe, or one of the Charlotte races in '80. They have Gardner, parades out these athletes that are going to replace Darrell Waltrip, or he's in the conversation of trying to.
Yeah.
There's this sort of battle between Darrell wanting either out of his contract or getting a better contract, and Gardner's going, well, I'll just replace you with anybody. This one guy was a football player, and then it was crazy. It was very, very crazy. And so it just was interesting to me. I guess it's funny to me, a little bit humorous to me, how that was a great race team.
It was amazing.
It was
team.
Like at certain times they couldn't get out of their own way.
I spent all those years with my head under the hood.
Right.
I really just tried to stay
Yeah.
focused on the car, and there was a lot of things going on all the time.
Right.
Butch Stevens came along. I hired him.
Why do I know that name?
Yeah, BSR Racing
Yep.
Products.
Okay.
Butch, yeah.
Yep.
And he's a great guy. And so we had this Buddy Parrott, the leader, and Robert Yates, the engine builder,
Yeah.
and I at some point I got elevated to car chief, and Butch was all of those people. Dan Ford was another one. Ducky Newman. Most of those people in that group went on to do
Big
more
things.
things.
Yes.
Yeah, but we just happened to be all together at that point.
Yeah.
And but Darrell and the car owner were in
Couldn't
contract. I guess there was not contracts in those days
Yeah.
for drivers, and Darrell had a pretty ironclad contract that he had signed, and so he ended up having to buy his way out of the contract.
Exactly.
And I was so aggravated because we were like 200 and some points ahead of Richard Petty in the middle of 1979 season.
Mm-hmm.
We had won races. We were doing
Yeah.
good. And I don't know what happened, but somehow we started doing worse and worse, and Richard did better and better. And we got to the last race of the year. I think we had a 3-point lead going into the race. And you know the name Jake Elder.
Yes.
Darrell always thought Jake
Was the man.
had the answers,
Yes.
but Jake didn't work for us. So Buddy was the crew chief, and so Darrell kind of pushed, here's what we need on my car to win this championship. And we put things on the car that we had never. I was just the guy that, hey, put this on, and we put the car together, but it was things that we had never even used, and we ran so bad in that race, we went straight back, and I believe Darrell needed that to learn how to be a champion,
Yeah.
because we had the point lead based on winning races, and then we lost a championship based on trying to preserve our point lead, and then we killed our chances of the championship by saying, "Oh man, this we got to stop this slide. Let's put some new stuff on the car."
Right.
And the car was worse than ever. So
Yeah. There was a race at Bristol, my dad's first win.
79, yes.
Yeah. There was, Darrell was pretty competitive and led a lot of the race. Dad was, obviously in the hunt. Come down to a final pit stop.
Yes, sir.
What all
Yeah.
you feel responsible? I see you diving into your little.
Oh, well, these are my notes. I'm
You're
gonna. So, Darrell, Bristol was his home.
Yeah.
He just dominated there.
So similar to Nashville, where the fairgrounds where he grew up, and cut his teeth.
Yeah,
I can see the similarities and why he would be good there.
It's just an amazing driver, just so talented in those days. I was a fan watching the things he could do with a race car. And we got the lead at Bristol, and we're doing fine. And I'm the rear tire changer. Buddy Parrott's the front tire changer. And we comes down the last pit stop, and I fumbled the right rear tire change.
Oh.
Get done with the pit stop. We came in leading. We came out second behind your dad.
Yeah.
And he went on to win the race that day. So I'm somewhat responsible for your dad's first NASCAR Cup win.
I know Darrell didn't love that last set of tires either. I know, just if that makes you feel any better, having done I did a big research project last year on the 1979 season.
Yeah.
And know that Darrell had a lot of comments about how that last set of tires just didn't make the car
I think he
feel
was
quite
being
as
nice
good.
to me.
Is that right?
Yeah, because I really took it badly.
Yeah.
Because we gave away that win. To us, we were winning regular. I mean, 7 or 8,
Yeah.
9 races a year we could win.
Yeah.
And so, but this was the first one that I was responsible for us losing.
Yeah. That race, when we did this project, we dove into trying to uncover as much as we could in terms of race broadcasts. And there is a race, that one race, Dad's very first win. There, to our knowledge, there is a race broadcast hiding somewhere, maybe who knows where, in some archives. There's a broadcast of that race hiding somewhere that doesn't see the light of day. And there is no TV broadcast of it, but there were some cameras. There's probably roughly around 8 to 10 minutes of footage of the cars circling the track and Dad winning the race. That is still out there today.
Yeah, in those days we weren't televised.
No,
it was a newspaper sport.
Yes, it was.
They had some radio. MRN was just getting going.
Back then, a lot of the races, that particular race was broadcast by a student organized broadcast local that was in App State or Boone or somewhere. Yep. And so we believe that somewhere hiding in their archives may be the broadcast of that Bristol race.
Possibly, but if there was a broadcast, the lighting would have been so terrible.
Not a broadcast, I'm sorry, but the radio audio.
Oh, the radio, yeah.
It may actually be hiding somewhere in the archives at App State.
Yeah.
You stepped away from NASCAR in 1980. What in the world?
That's the end of 79.
Yeah.
You were that frustrated. So frustrated
that
they fired Buddy Parrott right after the season.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking we had this great trend of winning races and gaining points, and we had Richard Petty.
Got a hell of a team.
Yeah, Richard he was a great driver, and we were beating him. And to me, and Bobby Allison and Cale, and we're beating all these guys at their best. And all we needed was to just catch our breath and go into the next year and take off. And I firmly believed we were going to be the champions in 1980.
Yeah.
And they fired Darrell and the Gardners got together, fired Buddy. And I was pretty aggravated with that. And at the same time, maybe they would bring in a guy that I could really learn from mechanically. Buddy was more of a coach and a tire changer and an athlete, but he was a great job as a crew chief.
Yeah.
But I was hungry to learn more about what makes these cars go. And they brought in Jake Elder, and I was still aggravated that he's the one that caused. Well, I don't know if he caused it, but him and Darrell getting together to throw away our Ontario race. So I just told Bill Gardner we went to Riverside. I think we won Riverside, and then we went to Daytona, and I told Bill, I said, I got an offer from a friend of mine. I think I'm going to go try it and see how it goes. And so I moved to state of Washington for a year, 1980. Yeah.
Left NASCAR. So this is fascinating to me because if this is happening today, I can't imagine somebody going, I'm going to leave this giant sport of NASCAR.
Yeah.
This amazing opportunity that I have. Yeah. But it's not. That wasn't what NASCAR was like in the late 70s and early.
We weren't making any money.
No.
None of us were.
It was a very blue collar, low-paying job, but hard manual labor.
Hours.
Crazy hours.
90, 100 hour, 80 hour a week would be a good one.
Nasty all the time.
Dirty
all the time.
Yeah. Wet sand in cars was the thing I hated the most.
Yeah.
And did a lot of it.
So what was in Washington State?
Robert always painted them with lacquer, and wet sanding was the way you made the lacquer shine. And Robert would not let you get away with skimping on the wet sanding.
Yeah.
So, a friend of mine had a tow truck business in Tacoma, Washington, and he called me up and said, hey, why don't you come out here? I got this business I'm starting up. Why don't you he actually had a body shop, and he wanted to start a tow truck business to help his body shop. I said, I'll give it a try. So I went out there for a year. During that year, Darrell got out of his contract. Ricky Rudd came in 81 at the end of the year. And I was doing well, successful, built this business up, and was finally making some money. And Robert was calling me on a regular basis, Robert Yates.
Yeah.
And
come back.
Bill Gardner. And finally there was a snowstorm in Tacoma, and I had to go out and work that thing with a tow truck on the freeway, and cars were just going by, and I thought, it ain't worth it. I miss getting trophies. We raced for trophies all the time with Ivan, all the time with Darrell. It was about getting the trophy, and there was no reward for towing a car better than the next guy.
Yeah.
You just knew it yourself. So came back in maybe March or so of 81. Cliff Champion was the crew chief then. Ricky Rudd was the driver, and they just told me to hang around a little bit. And so I did. Yeah, and I tried to help where I could. But I think we won maybe one pole that year.
Yeah.
And I don't think we won any races. And then at the end of 81, Bobby Allison and I were talking at a racetrack one day, and Bobby was getting ready to leave his team, and so we started a conversation there, and Ricky wasn't happy, and the team wasn't happy, so those things started to change.
Yeah. So Ricky Rudd would go drive for Richard Childers, I believe.
Yeah.
Bobby was leaving Bud Moore's car at the end of 80 season.
Right.
Or 81 season, maybe. So Bobby becomes the driver in 1982, and you'd win the Daytona 500.
That was my first race as a crew chief.
Ever.
Well, I was in first Cup race as a crew chief.
So I got us. You built one hell of a race car for this race.
Right.
Now, when I see pictures of this car, we'll talk about bumper and all that stuff, because everybody has their own ideas of that.
That's another one of those stories. That
I know.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to agree with your side of it.
I was there.
Yeah. I do want to say, when I look at this there's some really great shots of these cars in this race coming around turn 4. There was always a great little spot in the wall where the cameraman would give us really good shots of the cars exiting turn 4. You guys had, when you look at your car and you look at the competition, y'all were ahead of the game in terms of aerodynamics.
Yes.
You look at the right side of that car. It is completely flat.
Yep.
There's no wheel. There's no bubbles.
That was the best body ever. Yeah.
Yeah. And all the competition, they've got their damn their quarter panels beat out and trying to clear tires and all that stuff. And y'all have that damn thing flat as a board.
I'll tell you how we did it.
Yeah.
So testing always happened in January in Daytona. It wasn't a big deal like it is now.
Yeah.
You would just privately rent the track, and you go run a couple days, come home, and a couple other teams might be there, maybe not. You'd share the expenses. Now it's like everybody wants to go. But in those days, most of the teams couldn't afford it or couldn't get ready, whatever it was. So I didn't like those big fenders, clearing the tires. The way to do body work in those days was you put the rear end housing on a jack in the center, put the tires on it, and you would move it under the body and make sure it didn't touch any of the body work.
Yeah. And
I didn't think that was the right way. And so I went to the hardware store and bought this spray. It's called Great Stuff. It's like a spray foam.
Yeah.
And I sprayed the inside of all the fenders, of all 4 fenders, and we tested, and all it did was the tire it didn't do any damage. Just
rubbed the foam away
to the exact spot where the tire was running while the car was on the track.
Yeah.
Right? You didn't have to sit in a shop and try to figure it out, because you would always want to give it a little extra so you didn't burn the tire against the fender. So I had the exact location of where those all 4 tires were based on rubbing against that foam. And I just thought of it when we were down there one day.
Damn.
I was looking at these fenders, I said, why can't we push them in? Well, they'll rub. And I said, well, let's find out. So we did that, came back to the shop, and we made templates from the frame to the foam.
Yep.
Exact
where
shape.
It had rubbed.
Took off the body and then put a new body on right up against the templates. And that's how you saw that car so
holy
flat.
Yeah, because it looks different. It looks better or just completely different than the other cars.
It was probably 7/8 of a car compared to the other one.
Yes. And it does look smaller.
And we did a few other things.
Right. I know back in the day they did actually, I know Darrell, there's a car of Darrell's that Junior Johnson built. This might be a couple, 84, 85.
Yeah.
That's narrow. They narrowed the entire car because there wasn't an overall template width-wise. You just ran one across the hood down the back, down the top of the car, like the spine of the car.
Right.
But
I think we started that with that car.
Yeah, that car was a little
in
bit,
'82.
Yeah.
We built when we left the test in January and came back in February. We had body.
I guess I'm curious as to how did you understand that was the direction you needed to go? Was there wind tunnel testing even back then? Because I don't think there would be. How else were you learning?
There was. GM had just built a wind tunnel at the GM Tech Center in Warren, Michigan. And I begged and everybody I knew at GM to give us a shot in the wind tunnel. And they said they wanted us to run a Chevy. And we were running a Chevy Monte Carlo on the short tracks, but we wanted to run the Buick on the big tracks. Yeah. And they said, well, we'll go to the wind tunnel and take your Chevy and take your Buick, and if the Chevy's better than the Buick, please race the Chevy. So it was me and Bobby Allison, and we just met, and it was maybe December, something like that. And so we don't know a lot about aerodynamics at all. So we put the Buick in, and they turn on the fan, and if you know the wind tunnel, there's like 4 load cells under each tire, 4 scales essentially, and they would measure the force that the car's being pushed back, and they call that drag, and they measure the force of cars being pushed down as downforce. Mm-hmm. And so those scales would measure it with a given amount of wind, maybe 150 mile an hour wind. So we took the Buick out, we got all the numbers off of it, took it out, put the Chevy Monte Carlo in, and what you do is you lock the brakes on both cars, turn on the fan, and you read those scales. The Monte Carlo started skidding back on the pads. It had more drag. I didn't need any scales or anything to figure that out. So I told the GM guys, I said, we'd love to run the Chevy, but
it won't stay on these pads.
It's got to have more drag than that Buick. I don't know what your numbers are telling you, but my eyes are telling me that it's the same amount of wind pushed that car back. Yeah. And so that's when we went to work on the Monte Carlo SS with a slope nose. That was the first beginning. That was the beginning of it. We told them we'll run a Buick until you guys can come up with a better car. So then we started working on that in the background. But we went to Daytona. You're going to ask me about the bumper next. Yeah.
So there's some I forget what. I guess I think it was Joe Milliken lost control or something. But
no, we caused a wreck in Turn 4 at Daytona. But so to back up, we had this beautiful car. Yeah. I was really proud of it, and I believe Robert did the paint, but he didn't do the metal work. Another guy did the metal work, but it was beautiful. We get to Daytona, and soon as we arrive, they asked me, we didn't have cell phones in those days or anything. They asked me to step into the office, the NASCAR office. And it's my first time. I've never been a crew chief. I've always been I always had a crew chief. So they said my mother had passed away that night, the night before. And I'd driven down not knowing, get there to sign in. She lived in California, so I said, I'm sorry, guys, but I got to go. And I flew to California. That may have been on a Tuesday or Wednesday or something. And we had the funeral, I think, on Friday. And on Saturday, I believe, I flew back to Daytona, and we ran the Busch Clash, which was really my first race as a crew chief. I think we won it, but I don't remember. Yeah. I think we did win it.
Is this your Daytona 500 car?
Yeah, same car.
Yep.
And while I was gone, the guys took it through inspection, and Joe Gazaway, the inspector, he saw that the car looked so good this is what one of the things your grandfather always had against NASCAR was if you bring too good a looking car, they're going to find something. And so they wanted the crew to lower the bumper on the rear bumper.
Had you raised it?
Probably.
Yeah.
But it looked right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no measurement or template or anything.
They just looked at it and went, I want you to put that down a little bit.
Yeah. And so the crew did that. And I get back off the plane and I say, how's there, we had this problem in inspection. They made us move the bumper. We moved it. And
that was that.
I looked and I said, you guys did an okay job. I didn't crawl under and look at how they did it. It turns out they just put pop rivets on it. Yeah. Riveted it back to the bodywork and dropped it down an inch or whatever. Yeah. Satisfied the officials, and I had no idea that they didn't weld brackets on it. Yeah. They just riveted it to the sheet metal. And so we go on win the Busch Clash, and then the 125s, I think I don't remember that well. I think we were second or third or something. And then when the 500 started, we just took off. Yeah. And I think the race is 200 laps, and I think we led 160 of them. Yeah. Just gone. Yeah. And during the race, Bobby was passing Cale for the lead on the inside, and Cale bumped the back quarter panel, and the bumper fell off. Yep. It was not intentional. It was not. Yeah.
So that bumper comes off, and Joe Milliken ran over it, blew the right rear tire, and hit the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. And then one of the crew chiefs, Cale's crew chief at the time, saw what we were doing, and they interviewed him, and he said, they meant for that bumper to come off. That was his conspiracy theory, and I never have been able to get that true story out.
Kicked the ball down the hill.
Yeah, so I appreciate you having me on here for that one story, because it's been so changed over the years.
I wouldn't think that you would intentionally plan for the bumper to come flying off the car because
if I was there, I would have welded the bumper off.
Because of how dangerous that situation would be.
Yes, definitely.
You wouldn't do. You're not that. You're not that type of person.
I have more compassion for my friends,
for sure. And so, unfortunate. But at the same time, I mean, that knowing now what I know about bumpers coming off race cars, it certainly didn't hurt things. And I mean, it was a fast race car either way.
We were taking a lead when that happened.
Yeah. So. Well, you go win the race, Daytona 500. It's a great story, but it was one hell of a race car that you built, that you brought to the racetrack. You win 9 races, finished second to Darrell Waltrip in the points.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah.
So Bobby was new, and I had working with Ricky Rudd the year prior. Mm-hmm. I had met this engineer. His name was Paul Giltonen. Great guy, great engineer. And people weren't using engineers in those days, but he taught me a few things, and it gave me a lot of knowledge about, okay, you got 4 wheels, you want them to carry their share of the load, and you want them to agree on where they're going. Sounds pretty simple, right? But we were doing heavy springs, light spring. The springs are what pushes the tire to the ground. If one tire is not carrying its share of the load, the other 3 are going to give up sooner. Yeah. So Paul taught me these things. We go to Daytona with that kind of thinking, and we win the race. Well, the next week, Bobby calls me up and says, "Hey, that was great. Here's the setup I want you to put under for Richmond, the next race." And I said, "Well, Bobby, I think that, we got some other thing." No, that's what I want, that setup. So in those days, Bobby had driven for 21 years in the cup racing, and he had 21 car owners.
Yeah.
And I was our team was the 22nd. Yeah. So I knew that he was pretty hard-headed.
Yes.
But he was one hell of a race car driver. Unbelievable talent behind the wheel. But he wanted to engineer the car as well. And so we went all the way to we went to Martinsville, which is probably late April, and barely on the lead lap any of these races. Just terrible running after just dominating Daytona. we get to Martinsville, and Bobby says, "I know the problem. We need power steering on this car. We don't have the caster is wrong. And if we put the caster right, it's too hard to steer. So we need power steering." That makes sense to me. So me and Bobby, we used to qualify there, I think, on a Thursday. After qualifying, we went to a junkyard, local junkyard, and we found a Chevelle, and Bobby said, "That steering box and that steering pump, power steering pump, will be perfect." I said, "Yeah, it looks good." He says, "Well, let's get it off." I said, whoa, wait. We're at Martinsville. We're not going to re-engineer a steering system and the whole suspension between now and the race.
Yeah.
Give me a little time. So I knew some friends in California that were racing sprint cars with power steering. And so that week I called and I said, the guy's name was Tom Lee in Southern California. I said, "Tom, you guys run power steering on your sprint cars, correct?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Can you help me?" He said, "Yeah, I'll send you some stuff." He made a steering pump, power steering pump, and a steering box. And the next race was Nashville Fairgrounds. And Bobby called me up with the setup and said, "You got the power steering?" I said, "Yep." He said, "Okay, I think it was like 10 or 12 degrees of caster in both front tires." And we get to the track, and we got lapped probably 3 or 4 times. It was terrible. And this is also a side story on that Nashville race. Bobby, in those days, you didn't have a guy to hand the driver water. You had to do it with a pole. You had a cup of water on a pole. And when it came time for the race, you just looked around and found somebody that, hey, when the car comes in, put a cup of water on there and stick it in the window net. And this guy was so nervous, he just get to the car and drop it or shake it or what. Bobby didn't get a drink of water the whole race.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and so Bobby says to me, and we're running terrible anyway, but cars are dropping out. And in those days, 4 or 5 on the lead lap was so I said, "Bobby, we're just finally getting a little progress here. We can't pit." He said, "I have to come back to it was under yellow. So I have to come back to the pits for water." And I said, "Bobby, let me think about this." So this kid, his name was Joe McGinnis. He's an athletic young guy. I said, "Take these cups of water to the back straightaway and run down the back straightaway, and Bobby's going to pull over and you're going to hand him some water during the race under yellow." The lighting in those days was so bad. There was no TV. There was no replays. There was no. Could you imagine somebody doing that today?
No.
So anyway, we got him a cup of water. He drank it, finished the race. We were terrible, and we get home, and I called Bobby and I said, "Bobby, the next race is Dover. Here's what I'm suggesting. We won Daytona. You had just showed up and didn't have any. As soon as you got in the car, it was good. You drove it. You won the race. Since then, you've been engineering the car, and we haven't done really anything. When we get to Dover, I want you to just show up like you did at Daytona, sit in the car and drive." And
how did he feel about that?
Well, he was pretty frustrated too because his power steering didn't work out at Nashville.
Yeah.
And he had thought that was going to get us over the edge. And that kind of thinking is pretty prevalent in racing, where we're getting beat by the basics, but we're going to do a trick to fix all of that. Yeah, that's normal in racing, and that's against my DNA. I want to fix the basics. So I told him, I said, just do like you did in Daytona. Show up, don't ask any questions, drive the car, and see what you think. And so I got a hold of my friend Paul, and I said, "Paul, I need a good setup for Dover." And he's an engineer, a good engineer. And Bobby comes, gets in the car. I think we won that race by 4 laps, maybe, with power steering. Yep. But I set the caster, a logicals, maybe 3 3 on the left and 4 on the right,
Right.
something like that. Where everybody else had negative caster
They
on the
did.
left and positive on the right
Yep.
with the manual steering. So we just dominated that race. But it wasn't the power steering so much as the setting, the spring rates and the weight positioning and all of the things we did in those days. Got the bump steer right, and Bobby. Then we went on, and he said, "You got it, Gary."
Yeah.
And so we started then winning. So I think we won 7 or 8 more that year, but we gave away the whole
Half of the
spring.
season, yeah.
Or a third of the season at least. And so that's why we finished second in points that year. I think we won more races than Darrell, but
Yeah.
he killed us at all those other tracks.
Well, you'd come back in '83 to win Bobby's championship.
Yeah.
That was 7 victories that year. Bobby was an incredible race car driver. I know that you would agree. But to your point, very demanding, high standards. I always was curious, and I it was probably a different time and things weren't what you would assume. But he had one of his very first opportunities was driving for Junior, right before Junior would eventually take ownership of his car from Richard Howard.
The Coca-Cola car, yeah.
And then Cale wins 3 championships in this car. Cale
Yeah.
wins tons of races driving Junior's cars. That could have been Bobby Allison.
Easily, yeah.
And there was so many little moments in Bobby's career where the guy just was so cantankerous at times.
We got along amazingly in 80. Once we fixed the things in 82,
Yeah.
all the way through 83 to the championship, we were just great, a great relationship.
Yeah.
And I just had all kinds of admiration for him behind the wheel, driving. But then slowly, so if I missed, my engineer, that I couldn't bring him over because Bobby did not like the guy.
No.
Bobby did not want an engineer anywhere around. So I would call him and work remotely, and Bobby just did not like the guy. And I'm like, stuff works, right?
Yeah.
So I couldn't get that message. We couldn't get together on that. So at some point, Bobby said, the car's terrible. The power has no power, won't run. He's getting on Robert Yates and getting on me that the car's handling terrible. And I believe we had probably missed something on the setup. But so Bobby said, here's what we need to do. You could call it the motorhome lot setup, where the drivers would gather. There wasn't motorhomes in those days, so it was the motel pool.
I heard this is what's good.
Yeah,
Let's put this in.
You get the combination of everybody's, and you show up the next morning and you got the magic.
Yeah.
So, and we just started going downhill. I wanted to bring the engineer, and Bobby didn't want him, and next thing I know, 84 is just tough.
Yeah.
I think we only won a few races. At some point, he broke his shoulder, I think, at Dover.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an interesting time because Butch Lindley came and drove at Martinsville for us, and that guy was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
He was the instantly the best driver to just sit in the car and go. That guy, I always respected that.
Yeah.
His
son Marty works here.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
I've always had a big respect and appreciation for Butch and Marty. But so he drove your car when Bobby was injured?
Yeah, Bobby was out with a broken shoulder, and
y'all were supposed to win that race in the brakes or something.
We were gonna win.
Yeah, what happened?
And it's my fault.
Or they broke a...
No.
What happened?
So we had electric pumps in those days that pumped the oil from the rear end to the cooler and back to the rear end. And at Martinsville, you run such a low gear that the rear end gets hot.
Yeah.
Very hot. So you have to really have a good cooler. And myself, I took the impeller out of the electric water pump and I was going to put a new one in race day morning. And when I opened the box for the new one, it had a different cover that was aluminum, where the one I took off was plastic. And I thought, oh, that'll be better. It's aluminum. I'm glad they finally got a better. Well, the screws that came with the new one, the new filter, were shorter because the aluminum was thinner, but I didn't know it at the time. So I just used the original screws from the plastic one, put the filter in, tightened it up. They bottomed out in the holes, felt tight. I didn't have a look at it because it was behind the seat. I was working from above it. And, I was kneeling in the driver's seat with my arms around the headrest, trying to
blindly putting this thing together.
Yeah, but by feel, all 4 bolts are tight. Everything's good. We were lapping the second place car when the rear end went out.
Damn it.
Just gone. I mean, Butch, he taught me something unbelievable that day or that weekend that I still use today with my drivers. All the drivers I work with, I tell them this story. I said, Butch wanted the car to be as loose as you could make it on entry so it wouldn't push in the middle. He wanted to be on the curb at Martinsville in the middle of the corner. So if you're going north on the back straightaway and south on the front straightaway, when you're going east and west, he wanted to be going east and west. He didn't want to be pushing, waiting for it to stop. And so he was on the throttle so early. But to do that, he was off the throttle so early. And he said to Robert, he says, I think it was a 633 gear that he wanted to run. And Robert, no way. I'm not going to run that. The valves train will not last. We'd already tried that with Darrell earlier when we had to do an engine change during a race and years earlier.
Yeah.
But so Robert had experience. He wanted to run like a 580 gear, and 600 would have been a shoving match to get that in, but a 633 was like,
not on the table.
No.
Yeah.
And Butch Lindley came to Robert and he said, how much RPM is my maximum? And Robert, I don't know what the number was, say 7,900. Butch said, this engine will not go above 7,900. Give me that gear. He did it. He would be coming off the throttle. He drove by the tack until it got to 7,900. But he jumped off the corner so fast, and it was easy to roll in. He didn't even use any brakes, and just dominated, just passed everybody. Going away. And because of the mechanic at the time, me, put the filter in wrong, or put the bolts in. The bolts were longer because the manufacturer had changed the spec.
Damn.
And so we lost that race because of that. But Butch's whole career would have been 100% different if he could have won that race.
What happens that eventually you're off of the 22, or I guess it's 22 at this point.
The car owner, so Bobby's set on doing the setup and not wanting anything to do with the engineer, Paul. And the car owners asked me, hey, if we don't start doing better, we're out of business. I said, I'm trying, but I can't get anywhere with setting up the car.
Yeah.
Bobby's, he's got this old book, and that's what we're going to run. And you guys won all these races before. Why don't you run that stuff? I just can't get anywhere. And he said, to tell you what, you take your engineer and your ideas and go run a different car. And so we put the car together over a few weeks' time. Called it the R&D Car.
Yep.
And went to Daytona.
This was in the middle of 1985. So somewhere in early 85, you get off of Bobby Allison's car as the crew chief.
Yeah.
Is this
and Robin Pemberton comes in?
Was Robin already there?
I hired Robin for that reason. Bill Gardner wanted. He said, hire a crew chief, and you go away.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're like, great, I need some relief.
Well, Paul, in the meantime, got frustrated too. The engineer, he went to work with the Elliots. And the Elliots never said much about it, but Paul was
Helping
engineering Bill Elliott. And
they're doing really good.
Dominating, yeah.
Yeah.
So I called Paul and I said, Paul, he said, I've been kind of hanging around the Elliots, but they're keeping me, off to the sides. And I said, well, Paul, I got a deal for you. Come to me. Come back. We'll do this at Daytona to see what happens. So that year, Bill Elliott was winning everything.
Yes.
Came to Daytona, and we got Greg Sachs, who'd never won a race. And Paul and myself and one guy, he was this Australian guy, he might have been New Zealand, that had come to walking in the shop one day with sandals on, driving an old van and shorts and long hair, and he said, hey, I'm looking for a job, mate. And so it was the three of us, stayed day and night, worked on. He lived in the shop. He just set up a sleeping bag in the shop. We had a little building up there in Welcome, North Carolina.
Wow.
And
that's way far away from the rest of the shop, the rest of the group.
Yeah, it was the cheapest place we could find.
Damn.
Yeah, we didn't have any budget.
Yeah.
So we just put this together. We showed up at Daytona, and
this car was the car that Cale Yarborough had won the Daytona 500 with.
I'd heard that,
before.
but I am not sure.
You're not 100% sure about this.
I know it came out of Renier's shop, but I didn't know the history of it.
Yeah.
And it would have been it had been handed through a few people and needed a little bit.
Didn't the Sachs family own this car? And maybe
Greg,
because Greg ran in the 500 earlier in the year, and I believe finished in the top 10.
Yeah,
and
I don't know.
Yeah, and they may have purchased this car from Renier, and so when Greg when this all comes together, this is your car. This is how you get this car.
Yep, and we worked on it and got all the settings the way my engineer wanted it. And he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder towards Elliott because Elliott was just I don't know why.
Sure.
I just know that he was happy to come back and work with me. I'm the only one I think that embraced him publicly.
Gotcha.
That an engineer can help. And so we go to Daytona with Sachs, who'd never won a race. Bill Elliott had either won or had trouble that year. He didn't have any second place finishes that year, and I think he lapped the field at Talladega earlier in the year, and we passed Elliott and beat him for the win in the Daytona 400 in July.
I was there. It was
hot.
It was hot. It was hot, like most Daytona July races were back in the day. This was an upset, and nobody knew much about Greg at the time. The team was a bit of a group of sort of outcasts in a sense.
Yeah, no pit crew.
Yeah. You showed up and didn't have pit crew equipment, had to gather all this stuff on site. You mentioned during the race, I watched some of this the other day, and you mentioned during the race that you had a lot of ideas on this car that were just ideas that you had been wanting to try.
Right.
And that you were, they were ideas you couldn't try on Bobby's car.
Yep.
Right? Because
yes, sir.
If you put them on Bobby's car and they don't prevail, then there's more problems.
Yeah, it's hard if a guy tells you he doesn't like ice cream and then you give him ice cream and he's not going to like it.
Yeah.
Right. So I knew it was a dead end.
Yes.
Trying to say I got this engineer that knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's the smartest guy I've ever met on setting up race cars.
Yeah.
I want him to set up your car. It just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. So, what was special about this car? What are some of the things that, you guys feel like that you learned that you took to that race and were able to, find performance?
We tightened up the body more. Even Waddell had done a good job on it, and Greg, but it had been crinkled up and repaired, and so we tightened it up like we did before. We knew the clearances for the tires, and aerodynamically, that was all we did to it.
Yeah.
for the suspension, we moved the geometry to what we call roll couple, or what my engineer called roll couple. We managed to figure out how to get the front and the back of the car to work together rather than independently.
Yeah.
Even though you think of one long frame from the front to the back of the car, you need the tires to complement each other, not just the rear axle, the left and the right, but all four of them.
Yeah.
And typically what you want to do is get tire temperatures. So Paul had taught me that you measure your tire temperatures on a tire. You get three temps. You add those up and divide by 3. There's your average temperature of that tire. You do the other one on that axle, same way. You add those together, divide by 2, and you got your front axle temperature. And so you do that on the rear, and what you wanted was a couple degrees more front axle temp than rear. That was we changed things every practice to get those temperatures together, which told us all 4 tires are working. And when we started doing things like that, the left front was always way cooler and the right front was way hotter.
Yeah.
And you could get the average, but the average would come up at the expense of the right front tire. So we figured out, or Paul figured out, that you'd really want to look at all 4 tires, but then you wanted to look at the front of the car and the back of the car. And so in those days, a Panhard bar was only bolted to the rear end in one spot, and on the frame it had maybe 3 holes. and
the rear Panhard bar.
The rear that held the rear axle between the fenders on the car.
It was a fixed mount on the rear end housing. It did not have an adjustment up and down.
Right.
And on the chassis you might have 3 options.
So, and everybody just said make it level.
That's the way it goes. Yeah.
And Paul came along and said, it's in the wrong place. So we went to work and made ways to move it.
Yeah.
Left side and right side.
Which is absolutely every car out there right now in this race shop has a full adjustment on the left and right side of rear Panhard bar.
You've got power steering and adjustable Panhard bar and probably a pretty good bump steer. And you probably have a weight percentage a little more forward than you would have in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. So that was something relatively new on that car in terms of being able to, move the roll center in the rear of the car.
That's what we did, yeah. We moved the front. I think we moved the front down and the rear up, if I remember right. And it was so simple, I didn't want to broadcast that,
Sure, yeah. I know they asked you during the race, they interview you in pit road, and they're like, well, you said, we've got some great ideas on this car. And the guy goes, well, what are they? And you say, well, I don't really want to tell you that. Yeah. Like mid-race.
Which is more of a mystique than, hey, if I told you it's so simple, nobody would believe it.
Right. Yeah.
Some of the things we were doing.
So, Sachs ends up, there was a common misconception, I guess might be the word, about 2-car teams back then. Even when Skinner comes to drive for RCR in the 90s, Dad was like, oh, no, I don't want a teammate. We don't need 2-car. We don't. And Darrell Waltrip was the same way with Junior Johnson in the mid-'80s.
Bobby was adamant.
Bobby, same thing. Dave Marcus quits Osterlin in 79 to open the door, pave the way for Dad to drive full-time because he didn't believe in 2 cars for that operation. So, Bobby Allison was vocal that this R&D car is taken away from the focus that I need.
Exactly.
But even with all that going on, Bill Gardner decides to run Greg after the success of the Firecracker race. Greg's now in this number 77 team car.
Yeah. Robin's still the crew chief.
Bobby?
Bobby starts his way out the door. Yeah. With the sponsor.
There's a few weeks where Bobby's still with Gardner.
Yeah.
And the 77 of Greg Sachs is still on the racetrack.
I don't remember the time frame, or I don't remember how long that was, but I do remember.
Where are you in all of this? After Daytona, what happens?
I thought that that would fix everything. That was what my goal was.
Fix everything.
My long game was just.
Was Bobby going to come there to the shop Monday and go, all right,
I'll just drive this thing.
You guys are right. I was wrong.
Yeah. I really thought, but it went exactly the opposite.
Oh, wow.
It was, you guys, and unfortunately, his engine broke in the race.
Yes.
And so that was a conspiracy in his mind. We win the race with his teammate wins the race, and his engine breaks. And so when you add up all that in his mind, he was not going anywhere with this team.
And does Gardner think that he's found this? Oh man, well I got this Greg Sachs guy. He's look at him, right? He won his first race. We don't need this Bobby Allison guy, right? Is that so? I
don't know. I can't speak for him.
Yeah, sure. That. I was just I'm making an assumption there, but this is insane. How this team that's winning the championship, it's the Dygaard team that just cannot seem to like.
We could not get any traction.
Yeah,
we could have great runs, and then
just
second in points. We won with that one championship in '83.
So what do you do after the '84 Firecracker 400?
It's fuzzy between the. I can tell you what I did right after the race. I had to drive the hauler home, and I got on I-95 just north of the LPGA exit. The truck broke down. Well, first of all, there was a flat tire in the truck coming in. I had to fix that myself. Got that fixed. It was really hot that day. Got on the interstate and went a couple of miles, stopped on the side of the road. A fuel pump went out on the truck. So I took the pump off. And I went to Smoke. I got somebody to give me a ride over to Smokey's Smokey Unix shop.
Yeah.
So Smokey, he really, his day job was working on things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So went into his shop, and we were friends anyway. And he fixed the pump for me, and we talked forever. And finally got the pump. I wanted to stay and talk with him, but it'd been a long day.
Yeah.
And put the pump on, drove home, and from there to my next step in my career, it's kind of fuzzy. I don't know the timeline. Yeah. I just know what started happening and where I went.
While trying to solve all those issues at Dygaard, you get a call from Rick Hendrick.
Yes.
All right. What does Rick want?
We did. I do remember one thing. We did one race with Dick Trickle at Michigan in the R&D car. I worked with Dick. Trickle was an amazing memory of mine. But so I get a call from Rick Hendrick, and I get a call from Jack Roush almost at the same time.
Yeah.
Jack was living in Michigan and had a career in doing OEM work and drag racing and road racing. He had done a lot but he hadn't done NASCAR. So he's calling me saying, "Hey, I'm hearing you're available. I want to start a NASCAR team. I'm going to come to North Carolina and get things going." And I listened to him, and I thought, I don't know him. He sounds like he's going to make something out of this, but I'm not sure. Yeah. And then Rick calls me, and Rick says, "Hey, I heard you're available. I want to start a second team. I've got one team now. I want to start a second one." And I went and met with Rick, Linda, and Ricky. And Ricky was just a little guy. And we looked at some property. And Rick said, "I want to buy this piece of property, and I want to build a big shop. I mean, a nice shop." And we were all working in little, metal buildings with dirt roads coming to them in those days. And what Rick was telling me was pretty exciting, right? And, Rick may be the best car salesman in the whole country. Yeah. If you think about it, he's done very well. So he had me sold on how he was going to build an empire. Yep. Jack had similar conversations, but not near as much of a sales pitch. Yeah. And so Rick says, I'm hiring Tim Richmond. I've got Geoff Bodine. I'm keeping him, and I want to start a second team. And so I said, count me in. So I showed up for work. He gave me a desk at City Chevrolet next to his office at the car dealership. Oh, wow. Next to his office. And he said, it gets I want to be careful with the rest of this story because Harry Hyde is such a
respected
hero and well
Yes,
respected.
yes.
But he did not want a second team.
No.
And I didn't understand what I was up against.
Yeah.
And he wanted so Rick ended up buying the property around Harry's shop. And so I said, Rick, is there, can I get at the end of the shop and start working? And he said, Harry needs that whole shop. I said, well, Rick, does he have any cars? That, when I was over Rick took me through the shop. I said, yeah, it looked like he had about 10 cars there. Maybe I could get one or two and get started.
Yeah.
Harry doesn't have any cars that he could spare. And so, and then Tim Richmond went to Harry Hyde's team.
Yeah.
And Geoff Bodine came to my team. So I had a driver, no shop, no cars, and a desk outside of Rick Hendrick's, right next to Rick Hendrick's office, and it was November.
Wow.
and we had to build a team.
In a couple months.
So I brought back your grandfather.
Robert G.
Yeah, and he brought Richard Broom and a couple other folks and some resources. We rented a building over there on Highway 29 right behind BSR Products. Butch was he built the building as a warehouse. He got a permit to make it a warehouse. And I told Butch, I said, Butch, I need a favor. I need to use your building, and we'll rent it from you. And Butch says, it's only a warehouse, and it's only you got a certificate of occupancy for a warehouse. I said, well, we just need to put a restroom in. So one night, Butch calls a septic tank guy and plumbing guy, and after he got the permit, we made that into a shop.
Yeah.
and in the middle of the night, all of a sudden it went from a warehouse to a race shop. And we bought some cars from Billy Hagan from, I think it was Terry Labonte had been driving. He was going out of business, so we bought 4 or 5 cars, brought them in there, started building up cars, and it's Thanksgiving, December. Next thing you know, it's Christmas, and we're working Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's, run home. Everybody's Happy New Year, back to the shop. We work day and night because from November to February goes fast, and we ended up winning the Daytona 500 that year with Geoff.
I remember that race because it comes down to the last handful of laps, and Dad and Geoff are short on fuel, both of them. They both had to slow down to be able to conserve enough fuel to make it to the end. And it was who could make it. Yeah, who could do it. And Dad had to run down pit road and get a splash, and you guys were able to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
Tough loss for the Earnhardts, but at the same time, funny story for you, I'm not entirely upset that Geoff Bodine has won this race, even though it was at the expense of Dad, because to your point, my grandfather, Robert G.,
had done the bodywork.
Is working on that car.
Mm-hmm.
So every Charlotte race, my mother would come into town and stay with Granddaddy, and we were very fortunate, my sister and myself, to go over to Granddaddy's on Fridays and Saturdays during the race weekend and see Mom. And so, I'm all around Granddaddy's shop and all the people that were coming through there, and you're more than likely in that area and
all the
coming
time.
through.
Yeah.
And his place was a hangout.
Definitely. Late
grilling,
at night.
Grilling steaks all night long.
I wish I could talk like Robert.
Oh, yeah.
His stories were.
Yeah. And his old race shop back there full of racing stuff, and still probably racing short track cars out of there at that time. And there was a lot of Levi Garrett number 5 hats.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I get one of them hats, and I come home with that hat on my head, and my dad yanked it off my head, set it on fire, and threw it on the ground. And I was like, all right, I've learned a valuable lesson. He set it on fire, yeah. I've learned a valuable lesson here.
Yeah, we got off on the wrong foot with Dale, and it's partly my fault as well. So I think it was testing in January in Daytona. we got the Levi Garrett car, and they're there with their car.
Yeah.
And we were all, Childress, us, Junior Johnson, we're all trying to get more sponsorship from Chevrolet.
Yeah.
All of us. And there was this one guy that was the program manager. His name was Terry Lace.
Yep.
And Terry would come to the track and try to assess what everybody's doing, and try to then go back to the General Motors and try to figure out who to help the most.
Yeah.
Right. And so we were all working our own little, each of us work on our side of the street, trying to get more support. Obviously, Rick, a car dealer, helped a lot.
Yep.
But Childress, being with Dale Earnhardt, helped a lot with their sponsors, and Junior had his history with all of the people. So it was a daily struggle to try to get more support from GM, more wind tunnel time, more whatever we could get, money, private
and
cars,
heads and bodies,
private cars to drive, whatever it was. We just we needed support. And so Terry had to leave early on the second day, and he said, call me and let me know how things are going of the test. So I called Terry at the end of the day, and I said, hey, we just had the fastest time of everybody by a half a second around Daytona. I was looking at the other cars, and they were trying, and your dad and anybody, and we were the fastest. And so, okay, good, hang up. The next time I see Dale, your dad, is when we walk into the track for the 500. It was actually the week before for the Busch Clash, and he hands me a quarter. He says, you might need to, here's a quarter. Next time you want to call those Chevy guys, tell them I paid for the call. So he was pretty upset. I guess the word got back somehow to Childress, and Childress got upset. And Childress told Richard that I was bragging about how we were beating them in the test.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And so now fast forward, we beat them in the race, and he overshot his pits, if I remember right. He came in so fast.
Overshot the pits, and then I think he tore the transmission out trying to get off pit road. Right.
So it was all my fault because we would. It's got to be somebody's fault, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I forgot to tell him that, hey, I'm the one that gave you your first win.
Yeah.
But anyway, he did not like Geoff at all.
No.
Not a bit.
Yeah.
He had names for him. He would call.
He did not like Geoff back then,
and he kind of put me for a few years. I struggled to be as close to him as we had been.
Yeah. And so, let's talk about that. I mean, there were some moments when, it was tough for me because some of that stuff spilled into the Saturday races, and Geoff's driving Granddaddy's car.
Yeah.
So, I've got Dad spinning out Geoff Bodine in my grandfather's car. Yep. And, of course, man, my allegiance is with Dad.
Of course.
But I'm not really loving
it's still family. Yeah.
All of it, right? Yeah. I didn't know Rick quite as well back then. So I certainly, he was the competitor. But, those were some very, very tough times. I mean, as far as the Feuds, and Dad had been in plenty, that one probably was the ugliest. I think that.
Yeah, they made a movie about it.
Yeah.
So I was there.
Yeah. Were you in the meeting?
So
with Mr. France?
So they had what they call it the Winston at Charlotte.
Yeah.
The week before the 600.
Yep.
And Geoff and Bill Elliott and your dad all were competitive that race.
Yes.
And we're all trying to win $1 million or whatever it was.
Right.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
And we thought we had it, and your dad thought differently, and Bill Elliott was probably
the best car.
Yeah. So we end up tangling with your dad, and Bill Elliott tangles with your dad on that front straightaway, and your dad, I think he ends up winning.
Yeah.
But either way, our cars all tore to pieces, and it was our only car. It was the car we needed for the 600, and your grandfather was so upset that Geoff had done that to that car because he had to now work day and night to get it ready for Wednesday qualifying a few days later. So we get to the 600, and we got the car, and I'm pretty upset, and that we went through all this work and got nothing out of it. And Bill Elliott was upset, and your dad was upset, and so I'm trying to figure out how to say this the right way.
You're fine. You're in a safe space.
Yeah, just between us, right? So the NASCAR official came to me. I'm the crew chief. I'm there early. We're getting the car ready. He says, Geoff Bodine is needed in the NASCAR hauler. Bill France Jr. wants to see him. I said, well, he's not here. I said, as soon as he gets here, you tell him Bill France Jr. wants to see him. So I'm watching, and here comes Geoff in the gate. And I said, Geoff, you got to go to the hauler right away. Those officials are serious. They want to talk to you. And he said, yeah, okay. And he stood there. And I said, no, Geoff, really, I don't think they're going to let us race unless you go in there and talk your way into getting us back in a race. He said, all right, in a minute. And he went down to the restroom, the other end of the garage, and the hauler was at this end of the garage and the restrooms at that end, and we were kind of one of the first cars closest to the hauler. And the official comes back and said, Bill France Jr. saw him and is wondering why he is not in there talking to him now. And I said, he had to go to the bathroom. And so I go to the restroom, and I go in there, and I said, Geoff, you got to get over there. He says, in a minute. And I think he was just gathering his thoughts.
Yeah.
And finally I said, Geoff, I'm going to come in there and get you. Because we're going to race today, and we're going to win this race, but we need you to go get us into the race. If they decide to kick us out because of what you did the week before, we don't have a chance. You've got to go in there. So I get him, and we go. So the door closed. I didn't go in the room. And I heard some shouting from one person, and that was Bill Jr.
Wow.
And I'd been shouted at by him. He had shouted at me in many times earlier, or one time earlier. Geoff comes out, and he's kind of sheepish, and I said, Geoff, are we going to be able to race? He said, yeah, we can race. But I got to be in Daytona in a day or two.
Yeah.
And
that was when the real meeting happened.
Yeah, that's what they made the movie about.
Yeah,
Days of Thunder.
So there were a lot of issues through '87, engine failures, struggles. I kind of looked at, Geoff came out with a book recently that documented his career.
I haven't read it. I haven't heard it.
I will tell you, very interesting. I think you would really enjoy it.
What was his take on the engine problem?
Not necessarily. He just, there were just some challenges. The results I don't remember him really hammering too hard on anything individually about the final couple of years with Rick. It was just, the results just weren't kind of there. And, me personally, when I look at the stats or anything, I just, I don't really see anything that stands out. Rick's team, for many years, even beyond that, just never really got that foundation to where they could do it every single week until right around the early 90s, and particularly, obviously, when Jeff Gordon comes on board. There was a lot. There seemed to be, and this is just my assumption, you don't even have to comment, but even like beyond the years when you were there, with Schrader and Ricky Rudd and so forth, there was a lot of competition and that was probably very common with 2-car, 3-car teams back in the 80s and in the early 90s. Yeah. They're so competitive, so much so that they're detrimental to themselves.
So Rick asked me to go after we won Daytona, first time out, and Tim Richmond had a terrible race. I think he went to the hospital with broken ribs or something, maybe his knee or I can't remember what, but blew a right front tire, hit the wall. And I think the next race was Rockingham maybe. And so Rick comes to Rockingham. I think it was Richmond or Rockingham, and I'm leaning on a stack of tires. And I'm looking at them, and my tires off our car were all the same color, gray, kind of a gray look.
Yeah.
And next garage over is Tim Richmond's stack of tires, and 2 of them look almost blue, and 2 of them look almost new. At least one of them looked like brand new.
Yeah.
And so Rick comes up and says to me, "You need to help Harry Hyde." And I said, "Yeah, what can I do?" And he said, "Something's not right with that car. Tim says it doesn't drive right." And I said, "Well, Rick, here's my tires, and here's his tires, and he's not using all 4 of them. He's using 3, or maybe 2.5."
Yeah.
And that made the movie in a different way that
Right.
that Harry Hyde's character told Rick,
Right.
my way, his way.
Yeah.
But that was the actual thing. So I told Rick, I said, "Rick, just look. We've been running a lot of laps on these. He's running a lot of laps. You can just see that they're overheating some and underusing others."
Yeah.
And so Rick said, "Well, just meet with Harry. I'll set up a meeting." And so we go to, I think it was at City Chevrolet. I go in, I take a seat. Harry takes a seat, and Rick says, Now, Gary, I need you to tell Harry what you can do to help him." And I started to say, "Well, you got to use all 4 tires. I can help you with that. And you got to do, there's a few things that from the old days that just won't work. Used to work, but it won't work now." And Harry started in the conversation telling me what was wrong with our car, which he was probably right, but he obviously didn't listen.
Yeah.
So I just got up and walked out. and so Rick at that moment, I think, realized getting 2 teams to work together is going to be harder than he thought.
Right.
Yeah.
The 25 car in Tim Richmond would eventually find success. Do you recall, were you there during all of that? Not so much the success that Tim had. I think we can all say that if Tim had lived, he would be a champion. Dad would not be a 7-time champion because there was a moment where they were absolute equals.
Going for the same.
Oh yeah.
So I've worked with the most important person on a race team is the driver by far. There's no, hey, get an average driver and a great car and you'll be good. No, you got to have a great driver to have a great team. You can have, one-off wins and those kind of things, but to be a solid team, you have to have a great driver. To be a great driver, you have to race 24 hours a day. Your dad, every conversation I ever had with him, it wasn't, we'd be fishing in the Bahamas, and it wasn't one cast to the next. He's saying something about racing. 24 hours a day on his mind, how to get better. All the great drivers were that way. They would wander to, what do you get at this restaurant? Okay, what do you think? Hey, what do you think about this or this part of racing? The latest controversy, whatever it was. Always the best drivers 24 hours a day. Every one of them that I have worked with, except for Tim Richmond. Tim Richmond was the only driver that I'd ever seen. There may be more, but I just haven't seen them.
Yeah. That
would get out of the car and not think about the car till he got back in it the next week. Never thought about it. I'd see him out, and he'd just, hey, what's going on? We went to a lot of functions, social things and whatever. He didn't talk about the car ever, not a bit. Just wanted a party.
Yeah.
He did not care. And then he would get in the car, win a pole, win a race.
Yep.
A natural talent unheard of in my whole career.
You ended up in '88 going to a part-time role.
Yeah, I don't.
And you did some commentating work as well.
Yeah. You've been doing your homework.
Well, we've got a good team around here at Dirty Mo Media.
Obviously, yeah. So Goodyear was transitioning to radials.
Yes.
In '88, 87, 88.
Yeah.
And they asked me to help them do testing. Hoosier was also allowed in NASCAR. So there was 2 tire companies, and they were fighting hard. And so Rick was a Goodyear guy for sure, and I was a Goodyear guy. So Goodyear asked Rick if we could do some testing. I said, yeah, we can go test all you want. I'll get a driver and a car, and we'll just go do the testing, but somebody else run Geoff at the racetrack. And so I'm doing that, and we called it another R&D team, but it was basically we were in business to get Goodyear radials sorted out.
Yeah.
And so that gave me weekends off. And so ESPN called me and said, hey, would you like to come to the booth and be a commentator at races?
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'll give it a try.
Yeah.
Right? So it was Ned Jarrett, Bob Jenkins, and myself. The three of us sat side by side in a booth, and Benny Parsons was a pit road reporter.
Yeah. I listened to, I think you did Wilkesboro that year, and I listened to that race a little bit. And I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was, kind of one of the early concepts of the crew chief mind being in the room, being in the conversation during the race.
Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But I really didn't take it seriously either.
Sure.
I just said, yeah, weekend, yeah, you'll give me a hotel and travel and pay me a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I didn't work at it like those guys, Dr. Punch and Benny and Ned and Bob Jenkins. They worked it. I mean, it was their livelihood. I was just a guest.
So Felix Sabates wants to start a race team.
Yeah.
He buys the race team from Rick.
Yes.
This is the R&D team.
It was a tire test team. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it the same team? I might have the years wrong, but is this the same car that like Greg Sachs would race every once in a while? The 18 Slim Jim or Slim Fast car?
I don't.
Y'all didn't
think
race.
So.
You didn't
I
go
don't
to the
remember
racetrack.
that. Yeah.
So that might be later. I think in the 90s. So Felix buys this team or this group of guys.
Yeah.
Right. He's going to start a race team. Felix is part owner in the Charlotte Hornets. I think he'd also made a little bit of money in video games or Nintendo.
Yeah, Nintendo. Yeah.
Nintendo. But he didn't know how to get into racing, and Rick Hendrick would assist to help him start Sabco.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole operation is R&D team, and Kyle Petty's going to be your driver.
To back up just a little bit,
Sure.
Rick calls me and says, hey, my friend Felix wants to start a race team. Can you help him? I said, Rick, whatever you ask, I'll do it. And he said, well, just do that. And so next thing I know, I'm meeting Felix, and he's a new car owner, and I'm working for him.
Yeah. He's right. He's writing your checks.
Yeah. All of a sudden, my paycheck's coming with a different name on it. And so we had to build a shop.
Yeah.
We could find a shop, build it up, hire people, the whole thing. Again, I've done it many times over my career. And so Felix is, he's new to it. He's got a Cuban, Latin temperament.
Yeah.
which is an interesting one. Great guy, but short fuse.
Oh yeah.
And I'd never worked around somebody like that. His approach was do it, and then the next day it's you're spending too much.
Why are we doing this?
Yeah. So I was a ping pong ball in that, and we got going. We got Kyle.
Oh yeah.
I can remember I think we had 3 or 4 Chevy Monte Carlos that came with me and my little package over to start. And the first week I'm like, okay, Felix, we don't really have everything we need to run a full season the first year. Let's run a partial season while we build up our team. And he said, yeah, no problem. And I said, okay, well, we're working on these cars. And we'll go to Daytona, and then we'll skip Richmond and Rockingham, and we'll pick up another race at Charlotte. And by the end of the year, we'll run all the races as we build this program. And he called me up about a week later, and he says, hey, I just made a deal. I said, what's that? He said, we're going to run Pontiacs. We don't have any Pontiacs. So we're back to zero right after we got going and had to build Pontiacs. Yeah. And then unfortunately for Kyle, he had a lot of collisions in those first couple of years. So we were just and then in the process, while that's all going on, Felix says to me, he says, and I made a deal. I got us a sponsor, and we're going to run Richmond, Rockingham, and all the races. Yeah. So all of the plans made on Monday all change on Tuesday with that team.
You may remember it in that way, which is interesting. But what I remember about that team was very, very good-looking race cars.
Yeah.
Really nice paint schemes, pretty race cars, easily recognizable. They jumped off the racetrack. The peak antifreeze schemes were beautiful.
Yeah.
And to your point, the radial tire is being kind of woven into the fabric of the sport.
Right.
And at first it was like a couple races here and there, and then it's full time. You mentioned that you played a big role in the development of that tire.
Yes, sir.
You guys go to Rockingham, for example, and dominated the race.
Right.
Like, Kyle Petty has never dominated a race in his life. And he goes out there in that car, and no one could touch you. I remember that day watching that race from the infield, thinking, I mean, you had a comfortable half a lap lead literally the entire day, if not more.
Yeah.
And I often wondered, what it was that you guys knew about the radial and how to get that tire to perform.
My engineer.
Yeah.
Paul.
Yep.
Same guy.
Wow.
I brought him back.
Damn.
I got him back in there.
Oh, Paul.
Good guy. He's passed away a few years ago, but just an amazing engineer, just common sense guy. He could speak to me in words that I could understand.
Yeah.
Most engineers they got to dumb it down for a guy like myself.
Yeah.
But Paul came and said, "Oh, it's just a tire."
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's making a big deal of bias ply, radial, whatever. He said the reason a radial tire is better than a bias ply tire is because they roll easier. That's why they went from bias ply to radials. Is a belted tire. It's got a belt all the way around the tread. Rolls better than a tire that's made of cords that flex as it's rolling. So he said, if you understand that, you understand that you can't drive in a corner as hard as you used to.
Okay.
Right? Because your tire was partially your braking system on a bias ply tire, and it's a lot less of a braking system on a radial.
Yeah.
So he and I talked, and we talked to Kyle about this car. You can't charge, the banking at Rockingham, for instance, just lures you in. You drove it that way.
Yes.
You would drive in till something happened, and then you would push up in the middle and get turned and drive off. Kyle would roll in when he's going east-west. If the straightaways are north-south, he was on the white line, on the throttle, full throttle, on the exit. So to do that, you couldn't have the push in the car, and you had to drive it differently.
Yeah. You guys would sort of, I think you won Dover. I don't know. You had a couple of races where you guys just flashed and really had some good strength.
Yeah.
And it seemed like that that knowledge of the radial and the involvement of the early development of that tire was an advantage to a point, right? And then the field sort of caught up. Your drivers caught up.
Your dad did not like the radials.
No.
Because his style was to charge into the corner.
Sliding around, sliding the
just
tire of the radial.
Drive in with the right front just squealing. Yeah.
Couldn't do that with the radial.
No.
Everything's going really well until 1981. Kyle breaks his leg, I think, on the back straightaway.
I think we were leading in points at the time at Talladega.
He gets T-boned and breaks his leg. Dale, funny story these days. Working with those guys at NBC, they both tell the story a couple different times over the last 7 years of DJ walking up to the door of Kyle's car and saying, "Hey man, how's it going?" And Kyle looking at Dale Jarrett and going, "My leg is broken.
Yeah,
gonna have to get some of them guys to come over here and help me get out of here."
Yeah,
and that was a big setback for you guys.
It's pretty much changed history for that program. We had a trajectory that was, for us, the 88 to can't catch our breath and changing from Chevy to Pontiac, having a minimum crew, trying to get an engine company going. In those days, you didn't buy engines. You had to build them yourselves. We tried to build all of that stuff, and then having all the races put on us when we were trying to build through the year. Yeah. It took us till 91 to get our strength up, and I thought we were on a path to do great things with Kyle and Sabco. And when I think the accident was Ernie Irvin on the back straightaway, made some kind of move and took out most of the took out all the top runners, and Kyle ends up with a broken leg. And at that point, it just all fell apart. We couldn't ever get it back.
Yeah.
I can tell you what happened at Dover.
What?
So Kyle's out. I think he was out 12 weeks. So we get to the summer race in Dover, and Kyle says, "I'm back. I'm ready." I said, "Dover's pretty tough. We did 500 laps in those days in September. It was it was tough." I said, "Kyle, I think you might want to sit out another race." "Nope, I'm ready. I'm ready to go." So we get to Dover, and Kyle's a great guy. I love him to death. Still think he's one of my best friends. We, bless his heart, I guess that's probably the way you start this story. He just wanted to drive, and he was my driver, and I believed in him. So I said, "Okay, let's go." We're out there, we're running maybe top 5 or something. Kyle calls on the radio and says, "I got to get out. I can't do it anymore. I'm too. I can't do it." Davey Allison was walking behind our pits, and so I said, "Hey, Davey, can you? Kyle can't finish this race. You just dropped out. Can you help us out?" He said, "Yeah, sure." So Kyle gets out. Davey gets in. Kyle goes to the care center, and he's getting reports. Davey goes from a lap down to the lead lap. Now he goes from the back of the lead pack to the middle of the lead pack. Next thing you know, he's at the front of the lead. He's leading the race. And Kyle's getting these reports in the care center. He says, "Give me another IV," or whatever they were doing. And, Dover went on for hours. And so Kyle, we're working to win this race with Davey. And Kyle had started it, and he'd get credit for the win. And Kyle comes back and pulls on my sleeve and says, "I'm ready, man." I said, "Yeah, good. We'll see you next week." No, I'm ready. I want to get back in now." I said, "Kyle, you just came out of the care center. You got out of the car because it was too much for you." He said, "They fixed me up. I am good. I promise I am good." We're leading the race. I called Davey on the radio. The next caution comes out. I called Davey on the radio. I said, "Davey, unfortunately, I have to tell you that we're gonna change drivers." "What do you mean? We're gonna win this thing." I said, "Davey, we're just gonna change drivers. Come on in." And he's cussing and not happy about that.
Wow.
And Kyle jumps in, goes out there. They're still under yellow, so we lose spots, but we're there's not a lot of cars in the lead lap. We still have a good chance. They throw the green flag. Kyle goes through turn 1, 2, hits the wall on the back straightaway and just flattens it just takes out the whole side of the car.
Oh.
Just wrecks it. And I was so upset. I was upset at myself for letting him get back in.
Yeah.
But then I'm a team guy, and he's my teammate. This other guy is a competitor. Davey's a competitor. So I'm just upset that he even talked me into it.
Yeah.
I go down to the care center, and Kyle's laying on the mattress on the bed in there, and Richard's there, Linda Petty's there, and Patty Petty, Kyle's wife, are all standing there by the bed. And I come in, and I said, "Kyle, are you okay?" He says, "Yeah, man, I'm okay. I started to call him a lot of names.
You let him have
dumb. Yeah, they weren't nice.
Yeah.
The nicest thing I said was dumb. And Richard and Linda and Patty were all just standing there.
Taken aback. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just walked out. I was just so upset. I walked out, and all the way home, I'm thinking, I'm fired. That was it. I won't have a job Monday morning when Felix finds out about this, that I cussed out Kyle in front of his mother, father, and his wife.
Yeah.
And I get home and Felix is on the phone. What in the hell happened? What were you thinking to put Kyle back in the car? I said, I didn't think to put him back in the car. He told me he wanted to get back in the car. Well, why'd you let him? So it turns out it's all my fault.
Oh, hell.
Yeah. And so I figure I'm fired.
Yeah.
Get to the next, but Felix, he doesn't have a backup plan, so I'm okay for a while. Go to the next racetrack, and Richard Petty comes up to me. He said, I appreciate what you did. That kid of mine, is a nice way I'm going to put it, needed somebody his whole life to tell him that, what you just did.
Damn.
Yeah, so Richard was good.
Yeah.
That somebody.
That must have felt good.
I went from way down here to starting to come back. I'm still not sure about my job, but I felt like somebody at least recognized what had happened.
Yeah. I mean, that would be, as far as I know, your final job as a crew chief.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you know at that time that you were never going to be a crew chief again? When you leave that job, are you thinking that I'm done? I'm gonna do something else.
Through that winter, the end of that year, Bill France Jr. had a yacht and a sport fishing boat. Your dad had one. Felix had one. Dick Brooks had one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys had. So we would all meet in Marsh Harbor and spend a week or so, maybe early December, fishing. You know, we'd go out on these. We were catching nice sailfish, and it was a nice time. And we'd sit around and have dinner and on these boats. And Bill kept saying to Felix, I want to hire Nelson on these trips. And Felix was like, if you want him, you can have him. He was still mad at me.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
So I end up, I said, I'll go interview. And a guy named Les Richter, I went in and met with him and made a deal to go work for
the NASCAR. Yeah, the NASCAR Winston Cup Director. You're basically the head official in the garage.
Yeah, I went from complaining about officials my whole career
to be
thinking I knew how to do it better. So I walked in pretty arrogant, which if I had it to do over again, I would have had a different approach. But remember I told you early on that NASCAR needed better officials and they needed better processes. They knew that as well.
Yeah.
So my job was, but first of all, I never paid a fine, never got suspended, never had any.
As a crew chief.
A crew chief, never got caught. I paid there was $100 fine one time because I cut a hole in the roof during the race at Darlington to let some air in because it was too hot. But that was $100 fine. So I did pay a fine for some minimum.
Nobody remembers that one, Gary.
For jaywalking, essentially. Not any of the stuff.
Not performance.
Yeah. So Bill Jr. was impressed that I'd done all of these things that they'd heard about, and his officials never caught me. So he hired me and said, now, here's what you do, whatever you need to do. And before he hired me, I said to Bill Jr., I said, because I didn't know how things worked. I was just really a mechanic and a welder. I said, if one of the top teams comes to you and says they need something special, and you come to me and say you do something special for so-and-so. I said, how does that work? He said, that will never happen. Bill France Jr. had more integrity than anybody ever gave him credit for. I didn't know it at the time. I thought there was, that guy gets that race or that guy I actually, over time when you don't know, you start wondering. That guy was... He taught me more about how to live life correctly. The guy just was an amazing guy.
He was special.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
His brother Jim is same way. But Bill was the dominant guy at that time in NASCAR. They are doing it correctly.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. I just knew I was working with these officials that didn't seem to have a clue of what how a car was, and we could anything we could get by them, we would get by them. That was the deal. And instantly, I learned a lot about how the sport works.
Yeah. You'd work in that position from 92 to 2001. That's a long little spell.
Yeah.
And so you're the constant figure in the garage as a competitor in that garage for many years. We knew that everything went through you.
Yeah.
You know, and so you had a big role in a lot of safety innovation, roof flaps, power steering innovation, the Gen 5 chassis, cowl flaps, things like that. You were, played a big role in the progression and evolution of the race cars, and what is a very popular era. A lot of fans, even today, look back on that particular span of NASCAR. Of course, numbers were incredible, viewership, peak numbers for NASCAR in the early 2000s. But fans also loved the actual product and the cars on the racetrack.
Yeah.
You got to be very proud of your crew chiefing career, your accomplishments as a crew chief. What does this particular part of your life, where does that stack up?
So my life was trophies. How do you go get another trophy? And it all changed when I went to work for NASCAR. I didn't understand it as much as I started to, I began to as I worked for NASCAR. Their thing is a fair race, officiated correctly. Everything else will take care of itself, right? If somebody has an advantage with something, if it's legal, the others should be able to get that advantage. That's why NASCAR, different than any other series in the world, the cars are side by side in the garage. So if it's legal, it won't be long before
everybody gets it.
Yeah. That's the brilliance of the France family. They just realized that if the guy is winning legally, then the other guys will figure it out, and the races will be competitive.
Yeah.
If the guy's winning illegally, then he needs to have the best officials to find it. And I was the first of that group of somebody that knew the cars, looking at the cars.
Yeah.
And wow, I learned so much so fast about when I started to see everybody's cars inside out and talk to everybody and listen to.
How fun was that, I guess, because, as a competitor, I'm in one building looking at my race cars, and I can only look at the shell of my competitors. Right. I don't know what, Jeff Gordon or Jimmy Johnson or those guys are doing to the rear ends or the front ends of their cars, but because I can't see it, right? Now you're able to basically go and look at any car at any time, to a point in an organized space. What was that like? All of a sudden? That was
weird.
Yeah,
very weird, because I'd spent my life trying to hide.
Yeah, did you have like a sense of guilt at first? I bet.
Yeah, definitely.
Looking at their cars.
And these are my friends. I'd made friends with pretty much all the main people that were in the garage, and I did not want to give them bad news. But
so what did you do when you
gave
had
them bad news? Yeah.
What did you do? I mean, so when somebody has something wrong in their car, how did you handle the situation like this? How did you handle this situation?
The only thing I could come up with was to try my best to convince everybody, don't do something illegal because you will get caught.
Yeah.
And Bill France Jr. was pushing so hard for us to make examples of somebody that blatantly broke the rules.
Right.
And I didn't know enough. If I had it to do over, people would have got suspended for a lot of things that we fined them for, or we told them to stop doing.
You'd have been more.
Actually, I don't remember telling somebody to stop doing something unless if it was between the lines in the rule book,
Yeah.
hey, we're writing a new rule to stop that, so you need to stop it.
Yeah.
But that was so weird. I wasn't comfortable in that role at all. I enjoyed things like the rookie meetings. Where you were a rookie. I enjoyed talking with you, the young guys, about how to make it in this sport. I can tell you a good story about you.
Yeah. Oh, great. Let's go.
Involves your dad.
All right.
And you.
Oh, yeah.
So in the control tower in NASCAR, I at Bristol, you can see.
I remember this.
Yeah. You can see everything from a different, from the ground, you see cars like this, but from above, you see them more. You can
movements.
So Dale goes. You're behind your dad, maybe one or two cars. Dale goes into the turn and hits Elliott Sadler.
Mm-hmm.
Sadler spins, and you have nowhere to go, and you hit him.
Yeah.
But you're not damaged. Your car's not that bad, but it is ruined your day, pretty much. And I'm watching, and your dad's, I think he's lapping you.
Yep.
And you just turned at the start-finish line right into his door.
Mm-hmm.
And then went on. And so the next race was Texas. And the rookie meetings, you're going to be in a rookie meeting. I knew I was going to talk to you about that. And I said, Dale, did you hit him on purpose in the door at Bristol? He says, damn right I hit him. He pissed me off. Right? I said, Dale, that's your dad out of the car. In the car, you're a rookie, and I think he was a 6-time champion or 7-time champion. A rookie does not run into a 6 or 7-time champion just because he pissed you off. Yeah. You have to respect what he's accomplished, him and anybody else on the track. And you know what happened that weekend?
Well, you ended up winning the race.
You won your first race. Yeah. And you know what your dad said to me? Same thing Richard Petty said about Kyle. He said, somebody needed to straighten that son of a bitch out. And I'm glad you did it.
Yeah.
So he did his arm around the neck where it about breaks. I think my neck's still sore from that day.
Yeah.
But I don't know how I end up in the role of talking to these young guys like yourself at that time.
Yeah.
But I'm proud of those things, but mostly in NASCAR, I'm proud of the safety side, of what we did.
I remember, I remember when you were, and I'm speaking in kind of layman's terms because this is how I kind of view the sport, but I remember when you became like the head official, I liked it, because I knew that you knew what you were looking for. I knew that you would, when you saw something, you'd know what it was.
Right.
And as a competitor, you want the garage to be policed, and I knew that you would do a great job at that. But to your point, over the years, your focus and NASCAR's focus became more about safety and a quicker, more rapid evolution towards safety. And I did, we started having these meetings in Daytona for the drivers during testing. Yeah. And you were always involved there.
Always there. Yeah.
And which were new and informative and drove home the seriousness that we needed to have for our own safety and what our cars look like.
So I brought a list.
Yeah.
It's not a good list.
Yeah.
It's 10 drivers that lost their life driving NASCAR cars from 1991 to 2001.
Yeah.
Grant Adcox, J.D. McDuffie, John Nemechek, Rodney Orr, Neil Bonnet, Clifford Allison, Adam Petty, Kenny Irwin, Tony Roper, Dale Earnhardt. So 91 to 2001, I'm the it's my watch.
Yeah.
Right. I knew them all, friends with them all, had conversations with them about don't do it that way anymore. Try to steer their careers. Rodney Orr, for instance, it was 10 minutes after I had a conversation with him that he died in practice at Daytona. Neil Bonnet, great friend. Clifford Allison, I talked to him an hour before it, and then I went to the car. Most of these, I was at the car at the accident scene. That leaves scars that don't go away.
Yeah.
So what we did in those days, and it's on me because we built the cars within our community, we raced the cars within our community, we wrecked the cars, and we built them better, all within the NASCAR community. I thought there was nobody outside that knew more about this sport than us. When we got to Adam Petty's crash at Loudon, we started talking, and I said, okay, well, let me get my group together. We had, people in the industry, Mike Laughlin, Steve Meal, logical thinking people that I had that I knew would be straight shooters. And we go look at the wrecked car. You came to the NASCAR Center and saw your dad's car, right? So we would bring people in, but when you came, you brought Steve Meal, or I had asked Steve to come, and I think you asked for him you asked him if you could come along. So going through all that, knowing that I was a director, it was people, not only my friends, but I was in charge of the rule book as well. I had an engineer working for me named Steve Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
And Steve was a great guy. That he's the one that pulled me aside and said, we need outside help. And so that's those meetings you're talking about. We brought in John Melvin from, he was a GM engineer, but he was really a safety engineer. And John starts talking about restraint systems and Hans devices and seats and most of these names I read off were basal skull fractures. That's where your body stops and your head goes forward and it breaks the base of your skull.
Yeah.
I learned a lot of things I didn't really want to learn in that period of time, but in the end, going outside of our community for help, that was the biggest step that I think has brought us to where we are today. So when your dad's accident happened at Daytona, we were on our way with John Melvin on restraints, and we were on our way with Dean. We brought in Dean Sicking. We got a hold of him through Tony George at Indianapolis. They were trying to do a soft wall project, and they had hired the University of Nebraska to do a study on it. We joined that study. So we had the restraint system started with John, and we had started on the soft wall study. And then your dad's accident happened, and we had to investigate that one along with the other ones, but we had the most data on your dad's accident. And we were starting to meet on a regular basis within the NASCAR group, and also those three guys, John Melvin, Dean Sicking, and Jim Radden, engineer, all of them biomechanical engineers. All, bio means he understands the human body, and mechanical means he understands the mechanical side of it. All PhDs, great guys, and we're having a meeting to look at the outcry after your dad's accident, after Tony Roper, Cranny Irwin, and Adam Petty, also all in a short time frame, was I got letters like crazy, being the director, of everybody's idea under the sun of how to
fix it,
how to fix the problem. I bet you 90% of them were about the bumpers on the car, maybe more than 90. So I am faced with, we have a limited time, we're racing every week, and we don't have a huge budget, but we got to do something to make this sport safer. And so we took, we were investigating things and learning. These guys from the outside, with their way of investigating things, they opened our eyes into what to actually look for and see things that we hadn't seen. The seatbelt broke in your dad's car, and we learned that when the fabric is stretched too far, it actually melts in each thread has a little melted spot, which tells us it was a tear, not just stretched to death. Mm-hmm. So I asked the guys, I said, I've got this list of hundreds of things that people are suggesting. I got to get the most gain the quickest. What do I work on? What does NASCAR work on first to make this sport safer? And the three of them, one's a barrier guy, one's a seatbelt guy, and Jim Radden was an Air Force surgeon that was also in charge of ejection seats on fighter jets. So the things the Air Force had gone through trying to make a pilot safe as he's ejecting were very similar to what we were going through. So they said, the three of them said, we're going to go away for dinner. We'll meet you tomorrow, and we'll give you our thoughts. They came back the next day, and they said, let's look at it like a pie, safety pie. The biggest part of safety is going to be 65% of your work should be on restraint systems. You should restrain the driver in the car. Your dad always thought he wanted stretch in his belts.
Yeah.
He wanted to move around. He had this system that he and I talked about it quite a bit, especially when you started driving. He called me over and started telling me ideas because he was more worried about you than himself. And but his logic was that the belt should stretch and he should move around and he shouldn't be held tight, which is opposite of what these engineers are telling us. 65% is the hold of safety, is to hold the driver tightly in the car.
Yes.
The seats got much better. The belts got much better. We did studies and found there's a company called SFI. Mm-hmm. At the time, they were giving, if you sent a set of seat belts to SFI, you would send a set of strength numbers. They would test the belts you sent them to the number you sent them and say, yeah, they passed. Here's your sticker, SFI approved.
Yep.
They asked me what they could do different, and I said, number one, you go buy it from the parts store like a racer buys it. Number two, you test it to the standards we'll give you to make sure it passes that standard. And number three, you cause them you have periodic retesting to make sure they don't slip on their quality.
Yeah.
When we did that, SFI changed their way of doing business, and that's exactly what. So we did the study. We gave them all the information. All of that became SFI, which is now the leader in
the standard.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know when you buy something that says SFI, it's correct. In those days, not so much.
Yeah.
So we went 65% was restraints, 25% was the wall. What you hit should give a little bit, should move a little bit, and you'll lower the G-force the driver feels by 25% if what he hits moves. And that left 10% for the whole rest of the car. That includes fire, intrusion, bumpers, everything is only 10% of all of those letters I had from all of the so-called experts.
Yeah.
Went to the side, and we went right to work on the first two the most. And so we developed a safer wall. I think we crashed, it was 20-some cars without a driver into a wall at 100 and some miles an hour. I think it was 120 or 30. The worst crash of all the drivers was Adam Petty's. The hardest, when we studied the information, so that was the crash data we used to simulate the angle and the hit.
Yeah. And
eventually we found a safer wall, as Dean Sicking and his group found a safer wall, and we've got it up on all the tracks now. The way, if you think about the safer wall, you don't want a soft wall. It's like a catcher's mitt. it'll catch the car and actually be worse.
Yeah.
Our first tests were that way. So if you're going 200 miles an hour down the straightaway at Pocono and you move over and you touch the wall, did you hit the wall at 200 miles an hour? Your speed into the wall might have been 2 miles an hour.
Right.
So you really, the wall and the car, the difference is how hard you hit the wall, 2 miles an hour, right? But you're traveling 200. A NASCAR car very seldom has a T crash into anything. Maybe another car, but the car moves when you hit it. So there's not a solid hit 90 degrees in NASCAR. They're all some amount of speed down the track and some amount of speed into the wall. And so some of the, I don't remember the numbers, it's 20 some years ago, but most of the accidents we looked at, the speed into the wall wasn't all that great. The speed down the track was almost always greater. So the wall itself has a steel cover that pushes in and doesn't catch the car. It kind of redirects the car to go on down the track rather than stop suddenly. Now, if you watch the race at Chicago, those guys went into the tire wall. That was a 90-degree hit. The tires are great for that. Tires aren't great for a glancing blow. So guys would hit the tire wall and bounce out and drive off.
Oh, yeah.
But that's 90 degrees. The speed into the wall was the speed of the car, pretty much, in those crashes. So it's hard. The things I learned over that time frame was amazing. But since we've implemented all of the ideas of the restraint system, the wall, and then slowly into the car, I'm glad this is wood because we've gone 22. Well, it was Dale's crash was February 18th, 2001. Now it's July 9th of 2024.
Yeah.
So hope we keep it up.
Things are much safer for all of that. I'm glad we talked about this part of your life because it's allowed everybody to realize just how important that part of your life is to you. We think about you, I think often as a competitor and a crew chief, and as you continued working in IMSA for years on different projects and being very successful there. We often need reminders of your role as in the NASCAR organization and the work you did there. I'd love to. We've got a lot more that we want to talk to you about. Going to have to get you to come back and visit us again.
Probably time to go get a beer, huh?
I hope you've enjoyed it. I said it at the top of the show. I've always had a lot of respect for you just because of what you've accomplished. To be able to be successful as a competitor and a crew chief and a mechanic, to shift into the organization of NASCAR and be a leader there and help the sport grow and improve. You're right in that list of people that really truly left a very, very positive mark on the sport. I know that you're humble and won't take a ton of credit, but I just appreciate giving us some time coming here. I told you you'd have some fun.
Yeah, you're right.
I had a blast talking about all of the great memories. I eat that stuff up. I love the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
I love hearing the stories about how you guys accomplished all the things you did and some of the challenges that you had to go through. It'll never be that way again.
Well,
and the only way we're ever going to know about it is from stories like you guys can tell.
I'm very appreciative of what you're doing, but you're kind of retired from driving and being competitive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really easy for somebody like yourself with the history you have and the curiosity that you have to look back.
Yeah.
In my case, I'm still trying to win trophies on a daily basis.
Yeah.
I'm working every day to try to get the next trophy.
Yep.
Just got back from Le Mans, France, and had a terrible race there, but worked just as hard as if we had won the race.
Oh yeah.
So it's harder for me to sit down like this and talk to you
You're
about
still racing.
about what's behind when I'm still thinking
You're
about
still
what's
racing.
forward. Yeah, I want that trophy, whatever the next one is.
Yeah. Well, hey, we want you to come back.
I will.
I hope you will, because we have literally a whole another half of your life to talk about. People can. It's easy to learn exactly what you've been able to accomplish since your time at NASCAR. It's almost like you've had a whole entirely another life.
If I have one thing that I think I'm good at is getting good people around me, because I'm 2 days of high school in my whole life, and before that I don't remember in my whole life ever doing homework. So I'm not the brightest guy. I just like to surround myself with good people.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it, Gary. Thanks for being you. Thanks for coming and giving us some time. This is going to be an exceptional treat for our listeners, and I know they're going to enjoy this one. So we appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much.
Gary Nelson on the Dale Jr. Download. All right, everybody, that was the Gary Nelson interview, and hopefully you've listened to both parts. Just incredible. And again, we didn't even get to any of the IMSA career, which has been a very storied career for Gary, and all of the other things that he's involved in. We will absolutely get him to come back, so don't worry about that. But just so thankful. He came in here apprehensive, but was transparent and thoughtful and emotional even. You could tell how much that he carries a bit of responsibility for some of the tragedies and loss that we had during his time at NASCAR. But at the same time, he recognizes the hard work they did to get to where we're saved a lot of lives with some of the innovation. Just really incredible. I'm so thankful that he came and sort of opened up to us the way he did. And he left the room with a smile on his face, happy and glad that he did it. That was really my biggest goal, because I knew that it was so hard to get him to come in here, and I was like, man, my goal is to make sure he comes in here and has a blast. And so he'll be eager to come back, and we'll get to talking about the rest of his life and career at some point later this year, hopefully. So very thankful for that. Good job, Gary Nelson. We appreciate you. I hope the listeners enjoyed this one. I certainly enjoyed sitting here talking to him. We'll see you next week. Check out Dirty Mo Media on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram.